If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, With You and I Together, We're Invincible, Part 4. The giant wave slammed into the Beedrill, smashing it against a nearby cliff face and dealing a significant amount of damage. Hurricane. Seizing the moment of the Beedrill's paralysis, Will flapped his wings and used his ultimate flying move, sending a raging gale howling toward it. Bzz. Just then, a blinding light erupted from the Beedrill's body. Flash. Will's eyes stung, and he instinctively shut them. But when he realized the danger and forced them back open, the Beedrill had used teleport to appear right beside him, its large stingers extended. In that moment, Will could even feel the sharpness at the tip of the needles, his skin tingled with pain before it was even touched. Poison jab. A purple energy fluctuated, and the Beedrill thrust one of its stingers into Will's left abdomen. NGH. Will gritted his teeth. He reached out with one hand and grabbed the stinger, while a biting cold gathered on his right fist. He smashed it into the Beedrill's face. Ice punch. Given that the damage was the same, an ice punch in the rain was far more effective than the other two elemental punches. Will's fist connected solidly with the Beedrill's head. The Beedrill didn't dodge or block, it just tilted its head and thrust with the stinger on its abdomen. Another poison jab. Safeguard. Another stinger pierced Will's stomach, but thanks to Safeguard, although he was injured, he at least didn't fall into a poisoned state. Level 65. After that brief exchange, Will had a good idea of this Beedrill's level. And because of that, he no longer held any hope of killing it. The gap was simply too large, so large that he didn't know how he could possibly win. He could only try to stall. Just as Will was about to hit it with another ice punch, the Beedrill didn't dare to tank the hit again. The part of its face Will had struck was now covered in a thin layer of ice. If this continued, even if it managed to kill Will, it would be in no condition to continue the fight at the capital. The Beedrill struggled forcefully and broke away. But Will had no intention of letting it go. Ignoring his own injuries, he slammed into the Beedrill with extreme speed, then used his arms and wrap to bind it, dragging it towards the sea below. As long as we're in the sea. Will's eyes lit up, as if seeing a glimmer of hope. But he had miscalculated the Beedrill's strength. It pushed back with its arms, creating just enough space to get free. Seeing this, Will didn't dare to press his luck. He quickly channeled the electrical energy in his body and unleashed thunder. The electricity sparked from his body, shot into the dark clouds above, and then fell like a thunderbolt, striking the Beedrill on the head. The damage from thunder didn't seem too severe, but its movements became much stiffer. It had clearly been paralyzed. Ha! Will smirked. He didn't press the attack, but instead flew down towards the ocean to find his next opening. However, halfway down, he suddenly found he couldn't fly. He looked back and saw several wads of white silk stuck to his wings. At the other end of the silk was the Beedrill. Dragon tail. Will whipped his tail, trying to cut the silk, but failed. The Beedrill's level was too high, even its silk threads were incredibly tough. His tail wasn't sharp enough. Fire spin. Seeing he couldn't escape, Will turned his head and spat fire, intending to burn the silk to ash. But the Beedrill seemed to have anticipated this. It ignored the silk and used agility, appearing directly below him. Like a sewing machine, the Beedrill's 3 stingers moved at high speed, inflicting a dozen hits in just a few seconds. The powerful needles stabbed into Will's body again and again, punching holes and leaving deep gashes. Blood rained down, flowing down the Beedrill's arms and dyeing its body red. Will, who had seemed to have the upper hand, was now in a critical state. His consciousness began to blur. We're not even on the same level, he thought. He couldn't even find an opening to escape the stormy barrage. His 2+ years of effort were no match for a Beedrill that had been fighting for its life alongside Sakaki for 22 years. He had thought he was the only one in the kingdom who could deal with this Beedrill. But now it seemed even he was no match. The most he could do was stall for a few extra minutes. Liz. I think I'm going to die here. As the thought appeared in his mind, his vision began to go dark. Scyther. A familiar cry rang out. Will lifted his head, his consciousness clearing just a little. The next moment, the Beedrill's body suddenly seized up, and a pair of sharp scythes hacked down on its wings. When Will saw those scythes, his mind instantly sharpened. Scyther, the old alpha's voice sounded by his ear. Will looked up. Sometime during the fight, 10 Scyther had surrounded them, and the one supporting him was his friend. Scyther? How did you get here? Will's voice was full of surprised joy. He thought he was going to die a worthless death, but now it seemed things had taken a turn. His friend's level was about the same as his, and the others were all LV40+. Scyther, the old alpha said, not explaining. He swung his arms, cutting the silk threads binding Will's wings, then looked warily at the Beedrill. I can't run. And I can't run anymore. I want to kill him. Scyther, I need your help, Will said, looking at the Beedrill, his gaze hardening. Liz had told him, they absolutely could not lose this war. As long as they won, then even if she no longer had her land, she would still be the greatest queen of the Dragonite Kingdom, and she could still achieve her dream. If he let this Beedrill return to Sakaki's side, Liz's future would be in grave danger. Will looked down at his own body, which was riddled with holes. His eyes became resolute. If the capital were nearby, he could be saved. But it was hundreds of miles away. It was too late. Since that was the case, it was time to repay his queen's faith. Scyther looked at Will, his eyes stunned. He had understood the meaning in his friend's voice, the meaning of one heading towards death. I'm begging you. Scyther. With you and I together, we are invincible. The Scyther's eyes trembled, and then it nodded heavily. That's right. You and I together, invincible, Will grinned. Have your clan stay back. Just have them strike when they see an opening. Scyther. The old alpha commanded. The other Scyther exchanged a look, then retreated, forming a circle around the battlefield. Bzz. The Beedrill glanced around, feeling the paralysis, and steeled itself. It knew it probably wouldn't be able to escape. But even without it, the plan should be fine. It looked toward the capital, then focused on Will. Pokémon are creatures who are willing to give everything for their trainers, especially when they realize their own life is at an end. Bzz. Focus energy. The Beedrill scraped its stingers together. Focus energy. Will did the same with his claws. Scyther. The old alpha charged first. Quick attack. Double team. Dozens of fast-moving Scyther charged the Beedrill at once. The Beedrill raised its arms and fired countless pin missiles, piercing through the afterimages. It had already resigned itself to death, and its attacks were now more vicious and reckless than before. Extreme speed. Will immediately used the chaos to dive into the sea, completely disappearing from the Beedrill's sight. The other Scyther in the sky launched blades of air slash from a distance, harassing the Beedrill. The Beedrill used agility to dodge left and right, its eyes trying to track the remaining afterimages. It didn't know when the real one would suddenly attack. Pew pew pew. Scale shot. Just then, orange scales shot out from the surface of the sea like bullets. The Beedrill looked down and retreated. Scyther, the old alpha's voice sounded in its ear. Scissor. The next moment, his sharp scythes decisively hacked into its wings. The Beedrill's retreat had sent it right into his friend's attack. Its wings were struck again. The Beedrill found it difficult to maintain its balance. As it wobbled, it was hit by an air slash from another Scyther. Slash. Will would not miss such a critical opportunity. He burst from the water, two ice punches landing one after another on the Beedrill's back. Both hits landed, scoring critical hits, and the base of its wings began to freeze. Combined with his earlier buffs, these two punches caused immense pain. He then wrapped his arms around the Beedrill and dragged it towards the sea. The Beedrill struggled with all its might. At the last moment, it finally broke free with its superior strength and counterattacked, plunging a stinger deep into Will's chest. Facade. When in a negative status condition, the power of this move is doubled, and the Beedrill was still paralyzed. The immense power allowed the stinger to pierce straight through Will's chest. Twee. Will spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood was pouring from his wounds, staining the sea around them red. He could feel himself fading. By all rights, he should be dead. But some lingering force was keeping him alive, stopping him from dying just yet. The focus band. Remembering the item, Will grinned. Even as he was dying, his heart was full of hope for the future of this world. This world had Liz, it had Rendamaranki. The era of leagues would come, eventually. This new era won't welcome you. So, you can come down with me. Will smiled, reaching out and grabbing the Beedrill's shattered wings, dragging it down. The Beedrill struggled desperately, even trying to cut off its own wings, but the prolonged lack of oxygen, the paralysis, and the intense pain had sapped its strength. It could no longer break Will's grip. Finally, the Beedrill lost all its power and died in the seawater, sinking with Will into the dark depths of the ocean. Chapter 102, Lan and Liz. The Dragonite Kingdom and the Kingdom of the Land were now engaged in an all-out war. The sky, which had been clear just a moment ago, was now covered in dark clouds, and a continuous rain, though gentle on the face, made Liz's heart sink. Lady Liz, Ares, and Artemis are charging from the rear with their troops. One of her top generals, Drake of the Dragonite clan, reported calmly, his voice unchanged. They were not panicked about being surrounded, because they had already seen that in a direct confrontation, the Land Kingdom was no match for them. To put it bluntly, as long as nothing else went wrong, they would win this battle sooner or later, encirclement or not. At this point, General Drake's unit alone was enough to handle Hephaestus's army at the front. Send General Vulcan and General Stone to deal with them. The rest of the army, continue the advance. Defeat Hephaestus's unit first. Yes. General Drake immediately relayed the order. This annoying rain. It just won't stop, Liz said, looking up at the sky. She raised a hand to her chest plate, as if trying to calm her restless heart. The war raged on. Blood stained the earth. Liz rode her white horse across the empty silver road, her gaze falling on the distant battlefield, and her heart ached. The bodies of humans and Pokémon were scattered everywhere. Some people had used their own bodies to block spears meant for their Pokémon. Some Pokémon were protecting their beast collars, fighting off 7 or 8 enemies at once. Some people knelt beside the corpses of their Pokémon, sobbing, their will to fight gone. Some Pokémon, covered in blood, stood guard over their fallen masters, refusing to retreat even in the face of death. Many who saw this scene were struck with pain and anguish. Liz was no different. But even so, they had to grip their weapons and continue to fight. They fought so that their comrades would not die in vain, and so that true peace might one day come. Score. Scorp watched the beast callers and their Pokémon, at a loss. He didn't know if what they were doing was right or wrong. He was confused. War is necessary, Liz murmured, as if explaining it to Scorp, and perhaps to convince herself. As long as humans are in conflict, Pokémon will be endlessly dragged into war and die in great numbers, becoming sacrifices to human hatred. I must win this fight. Only when humans stop warring with each other will we have a chance to truly mend the relationship between our two peoples. Only then can that ideal of peace truly arrive. Liz pursed her lips, gripping her spear tightly. Her gaze, fixed on the battlefield, no longer wavered. I will live in an age of peace with Lan and with all of you. Just then, a disturbance broke out on the front lines. A unit from the Dragonite Kingdom had suddenly charged out of the Viridian Forest. Is Lan here? Liz's face lit up with joy. But she was confused, she couldn't see his figure. Before she could think any more, she led her remaining troops surging forward, pinching the enemy from both the front and the rear. Hephaestus's light cavalry unit had never expected an attack from behind. With their escape route cut off, they were quickly annihilated. Liz herself pierced Hephaestus's head with her spear. Where is Lan? Liz scanned the battlefield, but still saw no sign of him. She asked anxiously. Lady Liz, Lord Lan remained on the sea route. The fleet commander quickly told her everything he knew. You. Go and get General Drake for me. For some reason, after hearing the commander's words, Liz's breathing became uneven. She leaned a hand on her horse for support. Lady Liz. From now on, you are in command. Take out Ares and Artemis, then continue the advance toward the Land Kingdom's capital. Do you hear me? Liz commanded quickly, sliding off her horse. The main battle was decided. The Kingdom of the Land had lost. But her heart was filled with an anxiety so great she felt like she had forgotten how to breathe. Blaze, quickly. Fly south, she said. Her body felt weak, but she still managed to run to Charizard's side. Lady Liz. I'm going to find Lan. With those words, she mounted her Charizard and flew south. The rest of her Pokémon, save the 2 Gyarados, followed close behind. What did the ocean look like from below? Unlike the sight he had seen before, the ocean in Will's eyes today was terrifying. It was lonely, silent, and filled with despair. His body was still sinking, and with every moment, the warmth left it. It wasn't that deep here. He could still see the sunlight coming from the surface, but he could no longer feel its warmth. Any deeper, and he probably wouldn't be able to see the sun at all. Liz, you will definitely become the ruler of this land. You will definitely bring a better future to the Pokémon here. You can do it, even without me. But I don't want to die. Will moved his arms. He pushed away the ice-cold body of the Beedrill and used his hands to paddle at the surrounding seawater, wanting to return to the sunlight. I can't die yet. He used all his strength to kick his limbs, trying to swim back to shore. But what his mind perceived as powerful strokes were, in reality, just feeble twitches, floating uselessly in the current. The figure of a scyther appeared in his vision. Will's eyes could no longer see clearly, but he could make out his friend swimming to his side, carrying him up towards the surface. Splash! The old scyther finally broke the surface with Will and brought him back to the shore. But what good did it do? The sky was still raining, a depressing sight. The rain dance hadn't continued, it was the sky itself that was crying. Does the sky cry? And for whom was it crying? Scy, there. The old alpha lay on the beach beside Will. The other scyther stood around them, despondent. He turned his head to look at the body next to him, which was already turning pale, and let out a long, helpless sigh. He had never thought that Will so steady, so smart, so strong would die before him. He just wanted to quietly accompany him on this final part of his journey. The rise and fall of Will's body was becoming weaker and weaker. He tilted his head, his blurry vision fixed on the sky above MT Silver. He wasn't afraid of death. What was there to be afraid of? He still had many next times. But, in this life, there were still so many things he hadn't done. What he was afraid of was, that he would never see her again. That he would never have the chance. Lan, you have to stay by my side forever. Okay. Lan, in the future, we'll travel the world together. Okay. Lan, don't leave me for so long again. Okay. Lan. Okay. Liz. I don't think I can keep my promises to you. Will's throat moved slightly. His once bright, lively eyes were now grey and dim, and tears of regret streamed from them, flowing down his face and into the pool of blood beneath him. Scyther. Hearing Will's voice, the old alpha got up and looked at him. Its own eyes began to moisten. It raised its scythe and gently wiped away the tears from the corner of Will's eye, then turned away and covered its own face. The past scenes flashed before Will's eyes like a revolving lantern, and a faint smile appeared on his face. 22 years ago. A young Beedrill who had not yet become an alpha met a dirt-covered little human girl who had wandered into MT Silver. He brought her home. She named him Goldie. He learned her name was Liz. In those days, he took care of her, feeding her berries, huddling with her for warmth, taking her for baths. Though it was only for a few days, it was as if he had raised her. Back then, he was 18. She was 8. He had made a mess of his first life. It was bitter and unhappy, to the point where he had begun to wish for death. 2 years ago. A gentle, wise queen at the height of her power met a newly reincarnated infant Dratini. She brought him back to the palace and showered him with love. She named him Lan. He learned that she was Liz. Liz held him and refused to let go, insisting on doing everything for him herself, feeding him with a bottle, helping him molt, and cleaning up his messes at the academy. And the little Dratini grew and grew, becoming a beautiful creature famous throughout the nation. Lan took Liz flying into the sky, above the clouds, and into the sea. Snowflakes, clouds, and sea water were all delivered into her hands by him. He made her the happiest girl in the kingdom, and Liz, without reservation, gave all her tenderness and patience to the land she loved so dearly. Though it was only for half a year, it was as if Liz had raised him. That year, he was still 18. But she was 28. He felt that his second life was full of happiness. He didn't want to die at all. He wanted to live on. Lan, to protect Liz, to realize their ideal, forced himself to become stronger, running off to the perilous MT Silver to train alone for 2 years, and even found many new partners for her. 2 years later, Lan returned to the palace. The queen, usually so composed, threw all grace and decorum to the wind, running barefoot across the lawn and leaping into his arms. They promised never to be separated again. When the war was over, they would travel the world together and build an age of peace. They had set out for different battlefields. But, it seemed Lan was about to break his promise. I want to see you one more time. One last time. From south to north. From beginning to end. Lan. A piercing, grief-stricken cry echoed from the sky above the MT Silver range, along with the calls of several other Pokémon. But whether it was Goldie or Lan, he could no longer hear it. Chapter 103, After he was gone. BGM recommendation, to the faraway sky, please loop this song until the end of the next chapter. Later, the Kingdom of the Land's flanking air force never reached the isolated Gligar Island. The island was located west of Jubilance Town, while the Dragonite capital was to the northeast. The air force, coming from the east over the sea, wouldn't even pass Jubilance Town, let alone the Gligar's home. But in the end, the result was the same. The air force, composed of low to mid-level Pokémon, didn't last long against Wally's 500 Beedrill and the Pokémon from the academy before scattering and fleeing. On the main battlefront, the Dragonite army pursued the land army that had been blocking the rear, cutting them down. Seeing that they were no match on the main front and that their air support was silent, the land army fled into the mountain pass, trying to be the first to retreat to their capital and defend the city. General Drake considered this, but did not dare let his army follow them into the tunnels. Instead, he led his troops through the Viridian Forest to strike at the Land Kingdom's capital directly. But that was when the strange thing happened. The land army never made it back to their capital. Logically, they should have arrived long before the Dragonite army, as the mine tunnels were a much faster route than trekking through the Viridian Forest. Yet, they never returned. It was only later, when General Drake led men back to scout the path, that they discovered the entire land army, a combined force of 20,000 men and Pokémon, had been crushed to death inside the tunnels. While they had been fighting in the forest, a mysterious earthquake had shaken MT Silver, causing a massive tunnel collapse that had buried them all. As for the Land Kingdom's capital, when the Dragonite army arrived, the people not only didn't resist, but they welcomed them as liberators, leading them into the palace to capture Sakaki the White. Sakaki did not resist. He could have run when the army stormed the palace. Every king leaves himself a hidden escape route. But just as he was about to flee, a sharp pain pierced his heart. He had sensed the death of his Beedrill. And with that, he no longer wanted to run. He used to think the beast callers in his army were so childish and melodramatic. It's just a beast dying. Why act like it's the end of the world? Can't you just go out and catch a new one? Greatness requires ruthlessness. Now, he understood. His ambition, his unification, he didn't want to think about it anymore. In these last moments of his life, he just wanted to remember. To remember that day in the forest, meeting that little bug, getting to know it, and the 22 years of memories they had shared. If I could do it all again, I would still want this throne. But I would have made wiser, steadier decisions. Beedrill, if we could do it all again, would you still be willing to believe in me? Sakaki the White died. Not at the hands of the Dragonite army. He died by his own hand, drinking the poison secreted by his own Beedrill. The victor of the war was the Dragonite kingdom. The news swept across the lands of Johto and Kanto. The kingdom celebrated. But on such a day, there were some who could not feel happy at all. The guardian dragon of the nation, Lan, was killed in action. For most people, this news was irrelevant. In their eyes, it was a worthy sacrifice. But for a select few, it was a devastating blow. In a small courtyard near the royal palace, Iris stood on a second-floor balcony, staring blankly. She lifted her head to the dark sky, letting the cold wind and rain lash her cheeks. She didn't know why, but her heart felt so heavy today. Iris. Her mother's voice came from behind. Mom? Is there news? Hearing her mother, Iris turned and ran to her, her eyes shining. She was expecting to hear that her aunt and Lan were victorious on the battlefield. Lord Lan has been sacrificed. Iris's mother looked down at her precious daughter, swallowed, but still told her the news. Iris froze, tilting her head, as if she hadn't processed the words. She took 2 steps back, staring at her mother's face. Suddenly, her nose turned red, and snot began to run. She looked down, wiped it away messily with her sleeve, and then looked back up at her mother, shaking her head forcefully. Iris. Her mother's eyes turned red. She didn't know what to say. Iris seemed to have confirmed the news, confirmed that her mother wasn't lying. Her nose ran again, but she didn't bother to wipe it. She bit her lip until it turned white, her small hands twisting the hem of her skirt. She kept staring at her mother with wide eyes, full of unshed tears, still shaking her head. The lively light in her eyes was gradually being replaced by a dull fog. A sharp pain went through her mother's heart. She reached out and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "I don't want." A mumble came from her chest. "I don't want it. Wah. Iris finally couldn't hold it back any longer and collapsed into a hysterical, wailing cry. "I don't want Lan to die. I don't want him to." She struggled out of her mother's embrace, grabbing her dress with both hands and screaming, as if just by throwing a big enough tantrum, her all-powerful mother could somehow bring Lan back. But that was impossible. In the royal palace kitchen, Hestia hummed a gentle tune as she took a familiar bottle from a pot of hot water. Just then, she heard the anxious whispering of several maids in the hallway. It was normal for them to whisper, but Hestia gently crept to the door, intending to eavesdrop in case they were saying anything bad about her. "What do we do? Should we tell Hestia?" "No. We can't. But she'll find out sooner or later. The later the better. Hestia has been taking care of Lord Lan for so long. If she finds out he was killed in action, then..." Hestia couldn't hear the rest. In that moment, the world went silent. She couldn't hear anything at all. When she finally came to her senses, she found herself curled up in the corner of the kitchen. Her maid's uniform was stained with various sauces, and the kitchen was a total mess. The warmth in her hands made Hestia look down, bewildered. She was still holding the baby bottle. It was filled with the warm milk she had just heated up. But, even if she heated it 10,000 more times, what was the use? The big baby who was supposed to drink it, was gone. Hestia did not cry. She just held the bottle, curled up in the corner, and stayed there for a long, long time. So long that she didn't even know when she had fallen asleep. Time flew by. A year passed in the blink of an eye. The capital of the Dragonite Kingdom looked much the same as it had a year ago. On the plains outside the capital, an artificial flower garden had been cultivated. In the center stood a stone monument. Several Pokémon would often pass by the garden, look at the stone for a moment, and then quietly leave. Scyther. The old Alpha Scyther had come here for the first time. He had brought a flower that only grew in the middle ring of MT silver and placed it in front of the monument. He stood there silently for a long time. "I wanted him to stay with me, to see the day that peace finally arrived." A quiet female voice sounded from behind him. Liz, accompanied by Hestia, had walked into the garden. Scyther turned to look at her. In just 1 year, she looked much older. Her wine-red hair now had many streaks of white. She was only 31. Liz walked to the grave, raised a hand, and gently caressed the stone, then sat down on the ground in front of it. "I shouldn't have sent him on the sea route." Liz sighed, her eyes a little dim. In the countless nights over the past year, every time she closed her eyes, she couldn't help but feel guilt and self-blame. She was the one who had insisted that Lan go. She had killed the one she loved most. Every time she thought of it, the pain was so great she had to consciously control her own breathing. But no one blamed her, not even Hestia or Iris. Because if Lan hadn't gone, then all the people in the capital would have been taken hostage, and the entire Dragonite clan would have been killed. "When I was little, I would see people tying up puppies with ropes, and I thought it was so pitiful," she whispered. "But now I wonder, was I the rope that bound Lan's whole life? If I had only realized sooner. I would have told him to stop forcing himself to do things he didn't want to do for my sake. I wanted him to be free, to be happy, to live for himself." Liz hugged her knees, pulling the cape tight around her body. Suddenly, the white cape on her body seemed to become warm, a warmth like sunshine, enveloping her in a full embrace. Liz was in a daze. This feeling, it was as if Lan was hugging her again. "Lan. I miss you again." Liz gripped the cape, burying her head in her knees. Tears streamed from the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. In that moment, she looked just like the helpless and pitiful little girl she had been 23 years ago. A crystal-clear tear fell, soaking into the earth by her feet. In an instant, a small, beautiful flower bloomed from the spot. Liz, her head down, noticed its sudden appearance and subconsciously reached out to touch it. But the flower was like a mirage. Her fingers passed right through it, unaffected. In that moment, Liz seemed to realize something. She looked up, behind her. There was nothing there. But she could just feel it. He was here. Chapter 104, Epilogue to the Second Life. In the 20th year of the Dragonite era, Queen Liz, in her 38th year, announced her abdication, passing the throne to her niece, the 18-year-old Iris of the Dragonite clan. Afterward, the former Queen Liz took her few Pokémon partners and her personal maid, Hestia, and left the capital, heading north. No one knew where she went. She didn't tell anyone her destination, except for Queen Iris. Upon taking the throne, Queen Iris recruited many forward-thinking individuals and established the Ministry of Law. The man who served as the Chief Justice was Rendam Aranki. One by one, laws related to Pokémon were enacted. Although many people could not understand them, they had no choice but to accept. Whether it was Queen Iris or Justice Ren, they both shared a common ideal, that humans and Pokémon could coexist peacefully. No matter how much time it took to achieve this ideal, they would not give up, and they would teach their descendants to inherit their beliefs. If one generation could not complete it, it would pass to the next. If 2 generations could not complete it, it would pass to the 10. One day, they would ensure that a future filled with hope and peace would dawn upon all people and Pokémon in this world. They would pay any price. Aside from the change of queens and the overhaul of national law, many other things happened. For example, with Liz's departure, the Beedrill swarm that had always maintained good relations with the kingdom also gradually disappeared. And the founding queen's Pokémon, the Guardian Dragon, the decisive ace, Lan, became a figure of faith for the Dragonite clan. Even to this day, they have never found a second Lord Lan. But his 3 forms, from his past to his end, were deeply engraved in the hearts of every member of the Dragonite clan. Not only that, but thinking of the Pokémon that served both the first and second queens, the clan members developed a deep affection for Pokémon with wings. They felt that such Pokémon were the most trustworthy. Time passed like a river. Like a white colt flashing past a gap in a wall. In the blink of an eye, 60 years had passed. It was now the 80th year of the Dragonite era. The throne had been passed down to the 3rd generation, a queen with red hair. In that year, 2 major events occurred. First, the Dragonite kingdom's naval fleet discovered an archipelago to the south, upon which were countless nations large and small. When the Dragonite kingdom discovered them, they also discovered the Dragonite kingdom and showed obvious hostility. Anyone with a discerning eye knew that perhaps in the near future, these 2 lands, which had been at peace for less than 100 years, would be plunged into a new war. But this was still far off. The other event, the founding queen of the Dragonite kingdom, Liz, had returned. The entire nation was in shock. Everyone had assumed that Lady Liz had passed away at some point in the intervening years to join Lord Lan. No one expected her to still be alive. But the people's joy did not last long. The very next day, at the age of 98, Lady Liz, leaning on a cane, left the capital alone. This time, she did not even take her Pokémon. After that, she never returned. Everyone knew in their hearts what that meant. Another 300 years passed. The relationship between humans and Pokémon had greatly improved. It was no longer strange to see them living together. However, the relationship between humans and other humans had not changed. Instead, conflicts only intensified, now fueled by the power of Pokémon. Ambitious men rose up like weeds that could never be cut down. Forget wars between the Dragonite kingdom and kingdoms from other lands, even within the kingdom itself, villains constantly emerged, attempting to shatter the peace. At some unknown point, the Dragonite kingdom fell into its 3rd great war since its founding. This time, it was a war of 3 kingdoms. The Dragonite kingdom was caught in the middle, having to face an invasion from the northern continent while also fending off an attack from the southern one. The land of Johto became a 3-way battlefield. Humans and Pokémon alike were devastated, the land was filled with wailing and misery. The scale of this war was far beyond what the original war between the Dragonite and Land Kingdoms could compare to. This time, even the countless Pokémon of MT Silver were dragged into it, and the great alphas of the mountain range perished in the conflict. The endless smoke of war and the stench of death angered the 2 gods of the sky and the sea. The golden divine bird, shining with rainbow light, spat flames that burned everything, while the silver divine bird, commanding storms and rain, unleashed cyclones that destroyed everything. All who witnessed it were terrified, falling to their knees to beg for mercy. The war stopped. But the Dragonite kingdom was also destroyed. The human survivors of the Dragonite clan, not knowing where to go, happened upon the innocent Pokémon survivors of the Dragonite Valley clan, who had also lost their homes in the war. The 2 groups stared at each other. One side saw the red and blue hair. The other saw the chubby, orange dragons. In the end, they decided to join hands and build their own paradise around the flower garden where the monument stood. This time, they would not participate in any more wars. They were truly, very tired. The history that followed did not seem to deviate from its original trajectory. Unknowingly, everything returned to its destined path. If there was any difference at all, it was perhaps that the relationship between humans and Pokémon had improved by a few hundred years ahead of schedule. So, in the end, who was the real winner of that original war between the Dragonite and Land Kingdoms? Those who had first followed Liz believed until their dying day, that the winners were all the ordinary people, and all the Pokémon, of both Johto and Kanto. But looking at the final result, it seemed even they had not made much of a lasting contribution or change. In the 600 or 700 years that followed, the great state of the world continued. What was long divided, united; what was long united, divided. Human kingdoms were built and then destroyed. Wars began and then ended, over and over, endlessly. It truly proved the old saying. Those who came after mourned them, but failed to learn from their example, thus ensuring they too would be mourned by those who came after them. Until, finally, 7 pairs emerged from the masses of humanity, and they forcibly brought peace to this restless world. A Raticate and a Damaranki. A Dragonite and the Dragon Clan. A Beedrill and a Sakaki. An Eevee and an Oak. A Butterfree and a Sylph. An Arcanine and a Jenny. A Blissey and a Joy. Through the combined efforts of these 7 pairs, the organization known as the Pokémon League was established, seated on the Indigo Plateau atop MT Silver. The old laws of the Dragonite Kingdom were unearthed, revised, and put back into use. A system more suitable for the new era and the future rose to prominence. The regions of Johto and Kanto, after enduring countless calamities, finally, welcomed a complete and lasting peace under the sun. As for the other regions, they naturally had heroes of their own. And those stories will be told slowly, one by one. Chapter 105, A Third Life, Blessing and Curse. The Hone Continent. This is a region known for its rich encounters. Unlike the Kanto and Johto regions, which are dominated by forests, plains, and mountains, the terrain of the Hone Continent is incredibly diverse, featuring everything from tropical Rhine forests to deserts. However, its most striking feature is its vast expanse of water, an area nearly equal in size to the mainland itself, which stands in stark contrast to other regions. The continent is surrounded by numerous large and small islands, accessible only by sea. And because of its warm, subtropical environment, many people come to Hone's beaches for vacation during the hot summer months, while others come here to escape the winter. On an isolated island in the easternmost part of the continent is a city called Evergrande. Evergrande City was established a very, very long time ago, dating back more than 1,000 years, but it only began to be developed in earnest about 600 years ago. At that time, the ruler of the Hone Continent was the Devon Empire. They explored the seas to the northeast, discovered the Johto region, and the Dragonite Kingdom, which was at war with the Sinnoh continent. To facilitate the war, they began to heavily develop Evergrande City. Today, the city is famous for its abundance of flowers and its international port, and it has earned the beautiful reputation of a Pokémon paradise. From Evergrande City, one can travel to any region in the world. The Pokémon League is located on the same island, just in the northernmost part. Evergrande City is surrounded by a large forest, which was also named after it. Recently, some rumors about the Evergrande forest have been circulating in the city. A trainer who had come to the city claimed to have seen a green, onion-like Pokémon appear out of thin air holding an egg, which it then left in the forest before disappearing just as suddenly. Based on the trainer's description, some Pokémon professors speculated that the Pokémon may have been the legendary Celebi, which is revered as the guardian of the forest. There are still many, many Pokémon in this world that have not yet been discovered by humans, especially in the seemingly endless oceans. Some Pokémon seem to be born with powers that are difficult for ordinary people to imagine and for other Pokémon to achieve. These types of Pokémon are not only extremely rare, but an ordinary person might go their whole life without ever seeing one. And Celebi is just such a legendary Pokémon. According to historical records, traces of Celebi have appeared for over 1,000 years, but it almost always disappears the moment it is discovered by humans. There are many different theories about its abilities, but one thing is certain: Celebi absolutely loves forests. Any forest that Celebi has appeared in will later grow to be beautiful and lush. With the professor's speculation, Evergrande Forest became a lively place. Everyone was searching for the egg left by Celebi, curious if it might be another Celebi. At the top of the giant tree in the very center of the forest, a cute little onion head held a small green egg, looking at it again and again, its eyes full of affection. This was an egg she had picked up from another era, an era so long ago that even Celebi didn't know how far back it was. At that time, she had just traveled through time and had suddenly sensed a mysterious energy. She had followed the aura and discovered this green egg. Celebi still remembered that energy. It was still weak now, but given time, it would accumulate to a level sufficient to transcend time and space, becoming even more powerful than her. But the era the egg was in was full of danger. The whole world was at war, and even many of the gods were involved. To ensure the little one in this egg could grow up safely, Celebi had brought it to this relatively peaceful and quiet era. For at least the next 20 or 30 years, nothing major should happen in this world. Bye. Smooch. Celebi held the egg and gave it a gentle kiss. A glowing green energy flowed from her into the egg. Then, she held the egg in her lap, rubbed her hands together, and a verdant green seed appeared in her palm. She kissed the seed, and a mysterious blue-green ripple spread across its surface. Sigh, so tiring. Do you think that person was lying to us? I don't think so. There's no reason to lie. Don't think so badly of people. Suddenly, human voices came from below the giant tree. Celebi shivered and immediately dove into a light blue vortex. She had traveled through time for countless years and knew very well what a terrifying creature a human could be. Forget the countless wars they had started in the past, even in the future, many villains would repeatedly cause trouble and harm the innocent. This era was still relatively good. The great people who had forged this peace had not yet passed away, and the villains who would cause trouble in the future had not yet been born. Celebi left. As long as she was here, the baby in this egg would never be able to live a peaceful life. She didn't want this child to be noticed because of her. So, she had to leave this place, and even this era. But before she left, she didn't forget to infuse the seed in her hand into the green egg, offering her own blessing. The two people below looked around and then left. They had no intention of climbing the tree, it was over 100 meters tall. Without a flying-type Pokémon, they couldn't possibly get up there. A warm breeze blew through the forest. It was currently spring, the season when all things are reborn. The flowers, grass, and trees of Evergrande forest swayed lightly in the warm wind, as if the entire forest was happy. They seemed to be welcoming the arrival of the child of the forest. If in the next life, you cannot see your family and friends again, then, is reincarnation with your memories a blessing, or a curse? Will felt that he had been asleep for a long time this time. A very long time. The moment between his first death and second life had felt instantaneous. But the time between his second death and this third life felt like it had been thousands of years. Of course, it was probably just because he hadn't wanted to open his eyes. Perhaps he would have preferred to just die, to at least not be trapped in the maze of his memories for an entire lifetime. Grovel. Opening his eyes again, Will lay quietly on the spot. He forced himself to get up and looked around. First, I need to figure out what era this is. Maybe I can even see Liz and the others again, he thought, feeling a little more spirited. He quickly confirmed that he was in a large forest, probably in the center of it, and that he was on a tree of unknown height. It was definitely a fatal drop. How am I supposed to get down? Will walked to the edge and looked down, feeling a wave of dizziness. But at that moment, he felt a strange sensation on the soles of his feet. He looked down and immediately confirmed what kind of Pokémon he was. A Trico. Personal status. Wait, aren't there a few too many things wrong with this status screen? Will glanced at the panel, and his expression immediately turned strange. He knew a lot about Trico. After all, just before he had transmigrated, he had been watching its final evolution, Sceptile, fight a Darkrai. And as the grass-type starter of the Hone region and Ash's ace, Sceptile had always been extremely popular among anime fans. But his potential was purple. A Trico's base stat total was clearly only 310, which should be blue tier. Purple was for 400 plus. If a first stage Trico had a BST of 400 plus, he couldn't even imagine what a Sceptile's would be. Was my deduction wrong? Will frowned, doubting himself. But as he continued to read, he began to guess what had happened. First, in the held item section, not only had his 3 items from his past life been carried over, but for some reason, a miracle seed had been added. The miracle seed could increase the power of grass-type moves by 20%, which was perfect for a pure grass type like Trico. But the problem was the time ripple suffix. This time ripple had appeared in the Pokémon movie Zoroark, Master of Illusions. The main villain, Gring's Kode, had obtained this power. The time ripple was the power of Celebi. Originally, it was a power source that Celebi created to store energy for itself. But in other creatures, it could manifest as the ability to see the future or the past. So, a Celebi was taking care of me before? Then this recover move must have been taught by it too. That was the only explanation. A Celebi must have been taking care of him before he was born and had given him something like a blessing of the forest or a gift of Celebi. The specific manifestations were that his base stats had been raised, he had obtained a miracle seed with the time ripple, and the move recover. In a Trico's normal move list, there was no such move as recover. To think he had been forcibly taught it by a Celebi. This was very good news. The septal line could neither learn synthesis nor recover naturally. At most, they could inherit synthesis from their parents. If they didn't, they would never learn it. Their endurance in battle would be inferior to other grass-type starters. Now, with recover, his survivability would be greatly increased. If only I had this move in my past life. Chapter 106, Talent that surpasses a pseudo-legendary. Celebi. Will casually studied his new body and then let it be. He wasn't really in the mood to ponder his potential in this life right now. The soles of a Trico's feet are covered in small spikes, allowing it to hook onto vertical walls and climb with ease, even hanging upside down without falling. It sounded very impressive, yes, but this ability was of no use to a newborn like him. So, Will could only look around for Celebi, hoping it was still there and could carry him down. But unfortunately, no matter how much he called out or how long he waited, Celebi did not appear. He was dumbfounded. Will. Logically, since Celebi had given him so many special powers, it must have really wanted him to survive. But leaving him up here, if he didn't fall to his death, he would starve. I'm screwed, Will said, looking up at the canopy. There wasn't a single fruit. He shook his head in despair. He was tempted to just jump off and start over. But falling to his death would probably hurt a lot, and it was rare to get such a good starting setup. He was a little reluctant to give it up. Besides, with each reincarnation, the timeline might shift forward. He was afraid that the more he was reborn, the farther away he would get from Liz. What do I do? Pelly. What the? A voice suddenly appearing by his ear made Will jump. He whipped his head around and saw a dopey-looking polyper standing next to him. Will immediately turned and ran. What else was he supposed to do? Wait for it to eat him? To be honest, he probably wasn't even enough to get stuck in its teeth. Suddenly, a realization hit him, and he stopped. He turned to look at the polyper, which was staring at him with a confused expression, as if wondering why this little green frog was overreacting so much. If Will knew its thoughts, he would have sternly corrected it. He was a wood gecko, not a frog. Wait, there's something strange about this polyper, Will thought, his eyes narrowing. There were two main things. First, its eyes. Not only was there no wariness, but there wasn't even a hint of malice. After surviving in the wild for over 2 years, Will knew the eyes of a wild Pokémon. He could tell that this polyper was definitely not one. Second, it was very small. Not exactly small, but at 1.2 meters tall with a wingspan of about 2.8 meters, it was at a normal Pokédex standard, at least for the era of leagues. The era of leagues. Will's eyes widened. It was as if all the air had been let out of him, and he collapsed onto the ground. In the era of primal beasts, even domesticated Pokémon were well fed and would not be smaller than their wild, often starving counterparts. If this were that era, a polyper should have been between 1.8 and 2.4 meters tall to be considered normal. Even if this wasn't the era of leagues, a long time must have passed since the early days of Liz's kingdom. Which meant Liz was dead. Will lowered his head, his eyes filled with a dazed confusion. He didn't know what to do. In his past 2 lives, he had always thought about how great it would be to come to the era of leagues, find a trainer to take him in, and just freeload and wait to die. But now that he was really here, he found himself wanting to go back to that old era. At least, in that era, he had his family and friends. And now, he had to face this world all alone again. Pelly. The polyper seemed to sense his sadness. It walked over and flapped its wings, at a loss, as if trying to comfort him. But Will had no time for it right now. Even if the polyper were to scoop him up in its beak, he probably wouldn't react in time. Ah nom! What are you putting me in your mouth for? Will yelled, angrily pushing the polyper's beak open and jumping out. His reactions were still fast. Pelly. The polyper replied, aggrieved. It thought Will was sick because he was unhappy and had intended to take him to a Pokémon center. Thank you. I'm fine. I just don't know what to do for a moment, Will said, shaking his head. He reached out and stroked the polyper's side. It was fluffy. He leaned in and gave it a big hug. Thanks to Liz and his Dragonite form, he seemed to have developed a liking for hugging other creatures. The short, downy feathers warmed his heart and lifted his spirits a little. Pelly? The polyper asked, wondering if he wanted a tour of the city. A city? Okay, Will paused for a moment, then nodded. He didn't know what to do right now anyway. Maybe going out with the polyper would clear his head. Ah nom! The polyper once again scooped him up in its beak, but this time it left it slightly open so he could poke his head out and see. Will didn't resist. A polyper's beak is huge, over a meter long, and can hold many small Pokémon. In the anime, there was even one that held 3 Pokémon in its mouth at once. He looked up. It would probably take another 10 minutes or so to fly out of the forest. And so, he began to focus on studying his status screen and his future. Trico and Grovel were one thing, but he needed to look at the third stage, Sceptile. Its only praiseworthy stat was its 120 base speed. Beyond that, it had almost no advantages. Its physical attack stat was low, yet its best setup moves were physical, and its move pool was full of physical attacks. Its special attack stat was decent, but not great, and its special move pool had no good moves. It was a mess. Then came its Mega Evolution, which added the Dragon type. Good news, it was no longer weak to fire. Bad news, it was 4x weak to ice and now feared Fairy. Its 145 special attack and speed were impressive, but its ability was Lightning Rod. A Grass/Dragon type is already 4x resistant to electric. Giving it an ability that grants immunity is completely redundant. Are you supposed to give up your Mega slot just so Sceptile can eat an electric attack for a teammate in a double battle? Everyone says Mega Garchomp is a joke, that you can't find much worse. Well, Mega Sceptile is that much worse. That 4x weakness to ice, a symbol of the strong, was just a joke on Sceptile. As a loyal fan, Will swore that if he ever met the genius who designed Mega Sceptile, he would treat them to a very personal close combat. Good thing I inherited extreme speed and was blessed by Celebi. Will muttered. In the real world, Sceptile was surely not as bad as in the turn-based games. A Dragonite with 80 base speed, plus extreme speed, could outspeed a LV65 Alpha Beedrill. With Sceptile's 120 base speed, plus extreme speed, its speed would be off the charts. The only downside was that it couldn't fly, a truly epic nerf. And that was its original speed. He had now been enhanced by Celebi. He didn't know what his Sceptile stage's talent would be, but it might even be stronger than a normal pseudo-legendary. What should I do? Find a trainer and challenge the Pokémon League? Boring. I don't want to follow anyone but Liz, Will thought, looking out at the clear blue sky, though he was in no mood to appreciate it. He lowered his head and continued to stare at his personal panel. Gradually, his eyes widened. Time ripple. Will's spirit was instantly revitalized. That's right. This world had the power to travel through time. Celebi and Dialga. The former could travel through time, the latter could control it. If he could find either one, he could see Liz again, or even bring her to this peaceful era of leagues. If that happened, couldn't I fulfill my promise to her? In that moment, Will's previously dim eyes lit up. He could reincarnate infinitely. If he couldn't find them in one lifetime, he'd try for 10. One day, he would find Celebi or Dialga. Hee, Will happily wagged his tail. When a person has a goal, they have the motivation to live. Although finding them would not be easy, he was a grass-type Trico, and he had Celebi's blessing. Grass types live a long time, and Sceptile has dragon-type blood. Living for 1,000 years shouldn't be a problem. In that 1,000 years, I refuse to believe that Celebi won't come looking for me. And if it doesn't, I'll go find Dialga. Will nodded, his decision made. His long-term goal was set. As for the present, first, I'll check out the city this polyper is talking about, and then I'll take a boat to the Johto region. I want to see what's become of the Dragonite clan. Will planned his next steps. He had so much time, he didn't even know what to do with it all. In that short time, he felt the polyper begin to descend. Are we there? Will asked, curiously looking outside. His eyes began to light up. A big city. The familiar modern architectural style appeared before his eyes, filling him with a sense of nostalgia. He couldn't wait to get out and explore the streets. Sure enough, I've been reborn in the era of leagues. Chapter 107, Taken away by Officer Jenny. The moment the polyper landed, the sound of human discussion started up nearby. Hey? Why is there a little trico in that polyper's beak? I don't know. Don't polyper usually eat fish? Even if they eat other Pokémon, it should be wishy-washy or love disc. The little trico came out on its own. Looks like they're friends. Will climbed out of the polyper's beak and looked around. 3 or 4 children were gathered around him and the polyper. Seeing this, Will was even more certain that he was in the era of leagues. In the past, humans would have forbidden their children from casually approaching a primal beast. Iris had been spanked by her mother more than once for that very reason. Pelly. The polyper, seeming used to this, ignored the children and looked at Will, asking if he needed its company. Thank you. If you have something to do, you can go ahead. I'll just wander around on my own. Polyper, the polyper nodded, then flapped its wings and flew off towards the port, where its trainer probably was. Ah, the polyper flew away. It left the little trico here. What do we do? I don't know. It's so small. Should we take it to the Pokémon hospital? The 3 children squatted down and looked at Will, unsure of what to do. Pokémon hospital. Will looked up at the kind-hearted children, then carefully surveyed the surrounding buildings. So this isn't the same time period as the anime. He had confirmed it now. He was indeed in the era of leagues, but in a timeline much earlier than the anime. He could tell from the children's somewhat old-fashioned clothes and the older architectural style of the city. The skyscrapers around him only seemed so tall because he was so small. Compared to the height of the adults, they were probably only 3 or 4 stories. And the Pokémon hospital the child had mentioned. Everyone knows that this is what the Pokémon Center used to be called. It was only after the Pokémon League began to hold official battle competitions that the name was changed. Before that, they were just Pokémon hospitals, and their main social responsibility was to rescue and heal Pokémon. They didn't have all the other Pokémon-related services and equipment that the future centers would have. Trio, oh. The battle tournaments haven't started yet. No wonder. Will slipped between the children's legs and looked out at the city street. There were indeed a lot of Pokémon. Basically every person had one following them, as if it were the mainstream of this era. However, he barely saw anyone carrying 2 or more Pokeballs. If this era had battle competitions, contests, and so on, this would be a very strange sight. Clearly, the era of leagues had only just begun. Just then, Will's tail twitched, and he subconsciously took 2 steps forward. How did it dodge when its back was to me? One of the little girls asked, looking at Will in amazement. The 3 of them had just decided to take the trico to the Pokémon Center. Afraid it would run away, the girl had tried to pick it up. Will glanced back at them, said nothing, and scurried into a narrow alleyway. The little trico. Will it get snatched up by the Meowth and Persian in the city? I don't think so. They like to steal food, but they don't have a hobby of bothering other Pokémon. The 3 children couldn't catch up and could only watch as Will disappeared from their sight. On the other side, Will was moving through the city's shadows, trying his best not to be seen. Although the people of this era were very friendly to Pokémon, that was precisely why he didn't want to go out on the street. A lone baby trico was too worrying. If he was seen, he would definitely be taken to Nurse Joy or Officer Jenny, or even sent to the local Pokémon professor's lab. And he was still planning to go to the Johto region. If I want to get to Johto, a plane is undoubtedly the best choice. It should be able to reach a big city there. I just don't know if planes exist in this era. Maybe they do, but they're probably not very fast, Will thought, peeking his head out from an alley. He was looking for the way to an airport. Suddenly, a woman's voice sounded from behind him. The moment he heard it, he immediately bolted. Come on, do you really think my 2 years of trico? A terrified expression appeared on Will's face. He had been snatched up by something. With his reaction speed, no ordinary human from this era should have been able to catch him. It had to be a Pokémon. Based on the hot breath behind him, he guessed it was a fire type. Woof! A bark sounded. The next moment, the dog Pokémon delivered him into a human's hands. As he was transferred, he finally saw what had caught him. A Growlithe. Little one, what are you doing here all alone? You didn't run away from a daycare, did you? A somewhat heroic-sounding voice asked. Will turned his head. As expected, accompanying the Growlithe was the city's officer Jenny. Speak of the devil. What do I do now? Am I really going to be sent to a research lab? Will smacked his lips and began to speak his thoughts out loud. Humans couldn't understand him anyway. There was no need to whisper, he could plot his escape at full volume. What's this little one treacoing about? Honestly, a little baby like you can't be running around the city alone. You'll get snatched up by a Meowth, Officer Jenny said, holding Will and looking him over. She even reached down and gave him a little pat down to check. It's a little boy. What the you have no sense of personal space. Being checked like that, Will couldn't sit still any longer and began to struggle frantically. Not even Liz or Hestia had ever been so rude to him. Hey, don't move, don't move. It was my mistake. Be good, and when we get back to the station, I'll get you some moo milk. Hearing this, Will immediately settled down. He had no choice. He was pretty hungry right now, it was better to get something to eat first. In any case, even if he was sent to a lab, he should be able to escape. Worst case, he'd just wait a week until he was out of his infant stage. With extreme speed, he wasn't afraid of being unable to get away. You quiet down as soon as you hear about food. I bet you're going to be a big eater when you grow up, Officer Jenny said, playfully flicking his large tail with her finger. She then carried him out of the alley. After that, Will was placed in the basket of a bicycle. Is the police force this shabby in this period? Will sat in the basket and complained. Although the bicycle was a classic item in the games, he didn't think even Officer Jenny would be using one. How was she supposed to catch bad guys with this? He then looked out at the street. Humans were still using horse-drawn carriages, a mode of transport from 1,000 years ago. But come to think of it, Earth had used them for over 4,000 years, let alone the Pokémon world, with its varied levels of development. The Pokémon world's tech tree was very strange. On the one hand, they could create artificial legendary Pokémon. On the other, even the wealthy nobles were still using ancient tools and etiquette. A mode of transport like a horse-drawn carriage was still used by James's family in the future. Thinking of this, Will wasn't so surprised anymore. Officer Jenny skillfully got on the bike and began to ride towards the police station, the Growlithe running alongside. The journey wasn't far. The roads were well paved and very clean. Will didn't feel any bumps or smell any strange odors, the experience was quite pleasant. The police station was a simple, 3-story office building. If not for the deep blue sign outside, Will would have thought it was an apartment building. The Pokémon League still has a long way to go, Will sighed. Don't just sit there like a little lord. Weren't you running around just fine a minute ago? Officer Jenny said, stopping the bike and coming over to pick him up. A 3-pound Trico weighed less than the groceries she usually bought. Originally, Will wasn't going to respond to her, but then he looked down and saw the Growlithe's fluffy head and got an idea. Put me there, he said, pulling on her collar and pointing at the Growlithe's head. What about Growlithe? Woof. The Growlithe looked up, tilting its head, wondering why its trainer was calling it. Seeing that she didn't understand, Will gave a powerful leap. Fortunately, Jenny wasn't holding him too tightly, and he jumped free, landing on the Growlithe's large head. All right, let's go, Will said, grabbing the tuft of fur on top of its head. You little. Officer Jenny put her hands on her hips and shook her head helplessly. Woof. The Growlithe didn't mind at all. Like a happy goofball, it trotted behind her, its head bobbing. They made their way up to the second floor. The moment Will appeared in the office, he immediately attracted a lot of attention. Yo, Jenny, what little Trico did you arrest? Yeah, did this one steal something to eat? It probably got separated from its trainer. Come to Auntie, little baby. Auntie has some berries. Pokémon were common, but baby Pokémon were not. A Pokémon's infant stage was very short, only a week or two. Most of the time, before a trainer even realized it, their Pokémon was already past the baby stage. So, when the officers saw Jenny bring back a little Trico, they all found it quite novel. Chapter 108, Tranquility Daycare. In the police station. Yes, right there. Oh. Will was lying in a baby stroller, kicking his legs comfortably. A female officer in her early 30s was scratching the base of his tail with a back scratcher. He had never known that a Trico's body had such a sweet spot. Ha ha ha. Look at the little guy's face. I'm dying. That's our big sis for you. She can handle a baby Trico with ease. The off-duty officers gathered around, watching and joking. Of course. Back in my day, hey? Isn't that Granny Sola? The officer they called Big Sis was about to brag when she looked up and saw an old woman walking into the office with a cane. She quickly stood up to greet her, and the other officers did the same. Granny Sola, what brings you here today? Officer Jenny, who had a rather girlish and energetic personality, asked as she stepped forward. Little Jenny, my skitty, she's run away from home again. She's been gone for a whole day. Please help me find her, Sola said, her eyes red. She was clearly very worried. Run away again? Leave it to Grolithe. He's the best at this sort of thing. I'll have someone take you home first. It's fine. I can walk back myself. Don't let such a small matter interrupt everyone's work. Granny Sola shook her head and stubbornly turned to leave with her cane. But... Jenny, let her go. You can't persuade her, said Big Sis, who, as a veteran of the station, knew Granny Sola's personality better than Jenny did. She turned back, intending to continue teasing the baby Trico, but in the moment she had looked away, the baby had vanished. Where's the Trico? Hey? I think I saw him run off after Granny Sola. On the street outside the police station, Will quietly followed 2 meters behind Granny Sola. He didn't actually want to follow the old woman, he was just thinking. If he stayed in one place, he'd probably just be picked up and taken back to the police station like before, or, as Jenny had said, get snatched by a Meowth. So, he decided to follow someone for a while to pretend he had a trainer. During his time at the station, he had gathered a lot of information about this era and this city. This was the 20th year of the League era. Not the 20th year since the founding of the Home League, but the 20th year since all the regional Pokémon leagues had formally united. The Kanto and Johto leagues had been the first to be established, but that was 60 years ago. As for the city, it was Evergrande, the easternmost island of Hone, and the closest major city to Johto. This was great news. It meant he didn't need to find a plane, he could just go to the port and take a boat. The trip to Johto shouldn't be too slow. But the problem was, how could he sneak onto a boat without being noticed? He couldn't fly, nor could he climb walls yet. Will looked down at the soles of his feet. The small spikes were still very tender and certainly couldn't be used for climbing. He would have to at least wait until he was out of his infant stage. TCH, does this mean I have to go back to the station and freeload for another week? Will thought, then shook his head. The police station was nice, but the officers obviously wouldn't let him stay there forever. They would most likely send him to the research lab. And setting aside whether they would discover his connection to Celebi, the moment the Pokémon professor saw him, he'd probably just toss a Pokeball at him. The thought alone was terrifying. Worst case, he would just go back to the Evergrande forest and live the life of a wild Pokémon. It would be tough, but it wasn't like he hadn't endured hardship before. Trico. Will nodded forcefully, feeling very resolute. His sudden cry attracted Sola's attention. She turned, leaning on her cane, and immediately saw the little Trico by her leg. Little Trico, where did you come from? Sola looked around. The Trico didn't seem to have a trainer. But how could a wild Trico appear in the middle of the city? She was full of questions, but she knew what she had to do. Little Trico, are you lost? Do you need me to take you to the police station? No, Will immediately shook his head. Then, would you like to come be a guest at Grandma's house? I have delicious macarons. Will paused when he heard the word macarons. He didn't think he had ever seen such a dessert in the palace in his past life. He was suddenly curious about the taste. And this old woman seemed very kind, she didn't look like a bad person. And so, Will nodded and trotted after her. After they had gone, Officer Jenny appeared, throwing her hands up with a sigh. See what I mean? That kid is just a glutton who's never had good food. If a bad person came along, he'd be lured away in a second. Woof, Growlithe nodded in agreement. Oh well. With Granny Sola, there shouldn't be a problem. She'll definitely take good care of the little one. Woof. In the northeast corner of Evergrande City stood a two-story villa called the Tranquility Daycare. Behind it was a small but well-equipped yard where 7 or 8 Pokémon were playing. Come in, little Trico, Sola said, leading Will inside. The villa wasn't luxuriously decorated, but it was very warm and had everything one could need. Will hadn't expected that by randomly following an old woman, he would end up at a Pokémon daycare. This was quite lucky. Even a small daycare was a perfect place for a young Pokémon to grow up safely. At least he wouldn't have to worry about being attacked by other Pokémon, or about going hungry or cold. He decided to stay here for a week or so. Here, you sit here and be a good boy. Grandma will go get you something nice to eat, Sola said, placing Will on the sofa and then heading into the kitchen. Will looked around the house and knew that Granny Sola was not a poor woman. The furnishings were modest but cozy. She had likely spent most of her money on improving the backyard environment. When he had come in, he had caught a glimpse of it. The backyard was basically a miniature Pokémon paradise, with a flower garden, fruit trees, a pond, and a lawn. It even had some playground equipment for human children. It was clear that Sola was a kind old woman who truly loved Pokémon. Come to think of it, if you didn't love Pokémon, you wouldn't turn your own home into a daycare. A short while later, Sola returned with a plate. Here, macarons. They've just been heated up, so they might be a little hot. Eat slowly, okay. Sola first placed the plate on the table in front of him. Then she picked Will up, sat him on her lap, and held a green macaron to his mouth. So pretty, Will said, admiring the treat. He looked at the other colors on the plate, they were like works of art. But even art had to wait until his stomach was full. Nom. He opened his mouth and ate the macaron in one bite. His eyes instantly lit up. It was sweet but not cloying, crisp but not hard to bite. The texture was superb. And he could immediately taste that the green outer layer had been made with the juice of a nana berry. He was very familiar with the taste of these berries. Is it good? Sola asked, looking down at his expression with a gentle smile. Delicious, Will nodded. Hee hee. You can't eat too many sweets, okay? You're still growing. Grandma will make you a nutritious dinner tonight, Sola said, picking up a yellow macaron and offering it to him. Will squinted his eyes, savoring the food, and responded comfortably. Good boy, Sola said, stroking his head. She turned to look out the window. The sky seemed to have darkened a little, and she couldn't help but sigh. Trico, Will said, looking up at her. The old woman's hair was completely white, and her face was full of wrinkles. She even needed a cane to walk outside. She must be quite old. He thought back to what he had heard at the police station and guessed that she was worrying about her skitty who had run away. Well, if its level isn't high, I can beat it up before I leave and make it behave, Will thought to himself. He then turned and hugged Sola, hoping to ease her anxiety. Sola was a little surprised to be hugged, then she gently hugged him back, a happy smile on her face. This was why she loved Pokémon so much. These simple and sensitive little creatures were so good at comforting people. Suddenly, Will felt something scratch his tail. He looked and saw a ring on Sola's hand. The ring was crudely made and not very smooth, which was why it had felt uncomfortable when it brushed against him. I met him 60 years ago. We've been married for over 40 years now. Sola followed his gaze, and seeing the ring, she couldn't help but reminisce. Hearing this, Will knew she was about to start telling him her story. Thinking that he didn't have much else to do for the next few days, he decided to listen. Perhaps there was something he could do to help, to repay her kindness before he left. Chapter 109, Granny Sola's Past. Sola's meeting with her husband happened 60 years ago, on a winter's night. They were both taking shelter from a snowstorm in the same stable. At the time, they were only 11 or 12 years old. Sheltering with them was another skitty. The two strangers, who had never met, were brought together by the skitty's sudden meow, and from that moment on, they knew each other. Sola wanted to adopt the skitty, but her family was strict and wouldn't allow it. Her mother even kicked her out, telling her not to come home until she had gotten rid of the cat. A helpless Sola then ran into her future husband, who was out selling flowers. After hearing her story, he decided to adopt the skitty himself. It was only later that I found out that he had a little crush on me back then. He only adopted the skitty so he would have an excuse to see me again. Sola couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle as she told this part of the story. To see the skitty, Sola would run over to his house every few days. And to see her, he took excellent care of the skitty, making sure it was always adorable. 7 or 8 years passed in the blink of an eye. During that time, Sola and her husband had fallen in love, and with the skitty as their shared bond, they naturally got together. Fortunately, Sola's mother was quite open-minded about it and didn't look down on him because his family was poor. The two were married smoothly, with their parents and the skitty as their witnesses. Later, they had a child of their own. 20 years of a simple and happy life passed in a flash. But it was then that a great turmoil erupted across the entire Hone continent. In that turmoil, in the span of just one short month, Sola lost everyone she loved, her parents, her husband, her child. Even her skitty was gravely injured while protecting her, leaving it with a severe, chronic illness. In 1 month, Sola's happy life was completely destroyed. Lost and in pain, she followed her skitty and fled into the wilderness, hiding in a forest. There, she surprisingly managed to survive with the help and protection of the wild Pokémon. Sola didn't know how long she stayed in that forest. She only remembered that her skitty had found its own love there and was trying to start a family. By the time she walked out of the forest again, a new power called the Pokémon League had been established in the Hone region. Sola did not take the skitty back with her to human society. In her eyes, it now had its own family. Having personally experienced the pain of a family being torn apart, she was unwilling to destroy this new, harmonious little family, so she left alone. She returned to her home, sold all her property, and finally, in a corner of Evergrande City, she established a daycare. She would occasionally take in homeless Pokémon and help them find suitable trainers. Other times, she would accept requests from other trainers to take care of their Pokémon for a few days. All in all, her life gradually stabilized, and she slowly accumulated some savings, allowing her to manage her daycare even better. Until 2 years ago. A Breloom that had once saved her in the forest came to her daycare, holding a pink egg. After talking with it for a while, Sola learned that her own skitty had died from its illness decades ago. This pink egg was its grandchild. The egg's parents had each left with human trainers. Before leaving, the mother had asked the Breloom to deliver this egg to the human woman its father had spoken of. That woman was Sola. I never thought that he would still remember me, that he would even tell his daughter about me. It's a pity I never got to see him one last time, Sola said, tears welling up in her eyes again. My family owes him so much. I swore that I would take good care of his granddaughter. Her gaze, as she looked outside, was filled with worry. Will listened quietly to the whole story, but he didn't feel much. After all, he had come from the era of primal beasts, he had seen human tragedies far worse than this. By the way, little Trico, come with Grandma, Sola said, seeming to remember something. She stood up, took her cane, and began to walk slowly. Will wasn't in a hurry. With his short legs and small steps, he followed along at a leisurely pace. The large and the small, the old and the young, they looked just like a grandmother and her grandson. It took them 3 or 4 minutes to walk from the first floor to the backyard. Will looked around. There were 7 or 8 Pokémon there. It was impossible to tell which were wild Pokémon Sola had taken in and which were temporarily boarded pets. This meant that Sola's care for these wild Pokémon was no worse than that of other people for their own. In fact, it had to be even more meticulous to achieve such results. Look, Sola said, leading Will to a corner of the courtyard. There was a small fence, and inside it grew several plants. Will looked up. They all looked like white begonias, but he didn't know the specific species. My husband planted these with his own hands. Through the cold winters and hot summers, they've always survived. They're quite resilient. They were my husband's favorite flower, Sola said, bending down to carefully sniff one of the blossoms. It was clear she cherished these flowers very much, otherwise, she wouldn't have put a fence around them. They're very beautiful. Skitty's grandfather loved to sleep under these flowers. If anyone other than me or my husband got close, he would hiss at them. Sola couldn't help but smile, as if remembering the scene. But then her mood soured a little. Every time I see these familiar things, I can't help but remember the past, and the people from the past. It's never a good feeling, but it does make me feel that I'm still alive. Sola stood up and sighed. Then she looked at the little Trico by her leg and asked, Does a Trico have people they miss? Like your mother and father? You're still so small, you must be curious about them, right? I don't even know who my parents are in this life. But I do miss Liz and the others. Will shook his head, the memories that surfaced being from his past life. The little moments in the palace and the courtyard, it all felt like it had happened just a short while ago. Although there was still hope of seeing them again, who knew how long that would be? Thinking of this, he felt a deep agreement with Sola's words. They were happy and profound memories, but now, when he recalled these things and these people, his heart would feel an endless pain and longing. To long for someone from afar is to be trapped in endless memory. A short time apart can feel like an eternity of longing. Granny Sola, we found your skitty. Woof. Meow. Officer Jenny's voice came from the front of the villa. Granny Sola's spirits lifted a little, and she leaned on her cane, wanting to hurry to the door. I'll get it, Will said, seeing her eagerness. He ran to the door. Though he was short, his jumping ability was decent, and he managed to grab the doorknob. Click. The door opened. I was wondering why the door opened so quickly. It was you little glutton, Jenny's voice sounded. Before Will even touched the ground, she had scooped him into her arms. You still have no sense of personal space, Will said, swatting her with his tail. He then jumped to the ground and ran behind Sola. He was really afraid Jenny would take him back. Skitty, Sola said, seeing the pink cat in Growlithe's mouth. She hurried over to take it. Meow. The skitty, however, wriggled free, and without even looking at Sola, it ran over to Will and began to curiously sniff him. What are you looking at? Will's attitude towards this rude little cat was not good. Although he was only 0.3 meters tall, and the skitty was 0.6, he was not afraid of it. In his past life, he was the guardian dragon of the Dragonite Kingdom. In terms of seniority, this skitty's ancestors would have had to respectfully call him ancestor. Of course, that was all in the past. In reality, this was the era of leagues. Even if he yelled at the skitty, the most it could do was beat him up a little. He was confident the kind Sola wouldn't just stand by and watch it bully another Pokémon. Meow. The skitty was scolded by this little brother and shrank back, looking a little wronged. It was only then that it remembered Sola and ran to her, rubbing against her legs and purring. Hey, you're a feisty one, aren't you? Jenny said, walking over and gently tapping Will on the head. Ouch, the tap wasn't hard, but Will's body was still fragile. The tap made him cry out and hold his head. An infant Pokémon was as fragile as paper. In Unova, when Ash's newly hatched Scraggy wanted to battle, Pikachu's soft 10-volt had zapped it into submission. You little thing, you look so well behaved, but you're so fierce. Come back to the station with me. I'm going to have to teach you some lessons, Jenny said, reaching for him. I don't want to. Grandma, save me. Will was scared. He forgot all about his sore head and squeezed past the skitty to hide behind Sola's legs. Wait, little Jenny. If the child wants to stay here, let him. I think he's very well behaved. He's probably just a little shy, Sola said, remembering Will's gentle hug. Her heart softened, and she stepped in to block Jenny. She had grown quite fond of this little Trico. Since you've said so, Granny Sola, I'll let you off this time. But next time, I'll have to come and arrest you, okay? Naya will stuck his tongue out at her. Chapter 110, The Spoiled Princess Skitty. Dinner time. Granny Sola insisted that Officer Jenny, who had just gotten off work, stay for dinner, which resulted in Will, who had just been taunting her, getting a scolding. At the dinner table, Will was held firmly on Jenny's lap, not daring to move, obediently waiting to be fed. Open wide. Jenny seemed to be completely immersed in the act of feeding a baby, having forgotten to eat her own food. She held a biscuit-like treat in one hand and pinched Will's tail with the other. Ah nom. By now, Will could roughly guess the meaning behind some of Officer Jenny's actions. For example, pinching his tail was a signal for him to get the hint and open his mouth on his own, without waiting for her to force it. Crunch! Crunch! He chewed on the biscuit. It was crisp and fragrant, seemingly made from some kind of plant. The taste was quite good, but it was a bit hard on his jaw, not as soft as the macarons. It was probably because he was still in his infant stage and his bite force wasn't strong enough, so eating this kind of hard food was a bit difficult. Trico. Will pointed a finger at a small bowl of milk on the table. Thirsty. Jenny asked, picking up the bowl. But Will didn't want to drink it. Instead, he took a biscuit from her hand, dipped it in the milk to soften it, and then ate it. This time, the moist biscuit broke apart the moment it was in his mouth, releasing a milky fragrance. Not only was the flavor unique, but more importantly, it saved him a lot of effort. "You're a clever one, aren't you?" Jenny said with a smile, tapping his head with her finger. It was only then that she noticed her own plate was untouched. She placed Will on the table and began to eat. She's not too bad, just spoiled with a bit of a princess complex, Will thought, his eating speed incredibly fast. He was popping biscuits into his mouth one after another, and the milk in his small bowl was rapidly being absorbed. His attention was focused on the skitty nearby. Unlike him, who was being force-fed, the skitty was actively demanding to be fed. The cat just sat on the table, mouth open, and waited. If Sola was too slow, the skitty would show its displeasure by smacking the table with its large tail. Will would occasionally glance at Officer Jenny to see her reaction. There was none. From this, he concluded that this behavior was a common sight in her eyes. It was obvious. This skitty had been pampered since birth and had developed a serious case of princess syndrome. However, it hadn't done anything else wrong. And its princess syndrome only acted up around Sola. In front of others, it was as timid as a mouse. In other words, it was a classic case of being a tyrant at home and a coward outside. For a creature like this, just a beating might not be enough. She had to be made to deeply understand that her current happy life did not come easily. But Will couldn't think of a plan right away. And even if he could, he might not be able to execute it in his current infant body. He would have to wait until he was out of this stage. Will swallowed his last biscuit, then looked at the skitty, who was still waiting with an air of entitlement for Sola to feed it. His eyes darted back and forth, his tail tilted involuntarily, and an evil smile spread across his face. He then got up and walked over to the skitty's plate. He picked up a biscuit, dipped it in the milk, and tossed it into his own mouth. Meow meow. The skitty was instantly flustered. It jumped up and ran in front of Will, questioning him loudly. "You snooze, you lose. You eat too slow, so it gets snatched by others," Will said. He picked up another biscuit, dipped it in her milk right in front of her, and then tossed it into his mouth. He was already starting to feel full. Meow. In the end, the skitty didn't dare to fight this fierce-looking little brother. It could only lower its head to its own plate and start eating quickly. Sola was now saved the trouble of having to constantly feed it. Because she had been so focused on taking care of the skitty, she hadn't even had a chance to eat her own dinner yet. Trico. Will walked over to Sola, pointed at her plate, and gestured for her to eat. Sola blinked, then smiled. She first reached out and stroked Will's head before finally starting her meal. Meow, the skitty, seeing this, pursed its lips and turned its head, pretending not to care. Officer Jenny, who had been watching from the side, had a strange look in her eyes. She had originally thought Will was going to bully the skitty. But now it seemed he just wanted to give Sola a chance to eat. She hadn't expected this little Trico to be so smart and considerate. It seemed what Granny Sola had said about him was true. Thinking this over, she decided it was a good thing for the Trico to stay here and help Sola cure the skitty's attitude. She completely abandoned the idea of taking him back to the station. After dinner, Jenny left with her Growlithe. A few other people came to the daycare to pick up their boarded Pokémon. By the time Sola was free, the skitty was already tugging at her, wanting to go to the backyard to play ball. How could Will stand for this? The old woman had been running around all day looking for you. When she got back, she had to cook for you, feed you, and take care of the other Pokémon. Now that it was finally evening, she had to go out into the dark, hold her aching back, and throw a ball for you? Will followed them to the backyard. He immediately brought over a chair and had Sola sit down and watch, while he picked up the ball himself. "I'll play with you." Meow. The skitty, seeing Will holding the ball, couldn't help but shrink back and take a few steps away. Although Will wasn't much taller than the ball, the skitty felt his gaze was very fierce, a look it had never seen before. "Catch," Will grinned. He tossed the ball into the air, then used his tail for a heavy slap. Tap. A gentle sound was heard, and the ball flew out slowly. Meow. Seeing that Will wasn't looking for trouble, the skitty immediately relaxed and happily chased after the ball. A skitty is just that kind of Pokémon, it has a habit of chasing after anything that moves. Will, on the other hand, stood panting. He had clearly used all his strength, intending to teach the arrogant little cat a lesson. But it turned out that his full strength was only barely enough to bat the ball away. He hadn't realized he was so weak. When Ash's newly hatched Scraggy used a 120% power headbutt on Pikachu, Pikachu only felt a little tickle. He. Sola, watching from the side, saw Will's expression and couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. Her movements were gentle and graceful, perfectly in line with the etiquette of an old-world lady. Liz will probably be this elegant when she's an old woman, Will thought, momentarily stunned by the sight. He rested for a moment, then stood up straight, having lost the desire to teach the Skitty a lesson. Since Sola enjoyed watching the two children play together, he might as well play with the Skitty for a while. And then, the courtyard unexpectedly became lively. The other Pokémon, who had been resting, saw how much fun Will and the Skitty were having and ran over to join in. Sometimes they would even get into a playful tussle over the ball. Sola rested her chin on her hand, quietly watching them play, occasionally clapping to cheer on a Pokémon that was getting discouraged. She wished this moment could last a little longer. The sky grew darker, and the spring night wind was still not warm. Ahem. Sola tightened her clothes and coughed twice. Will, who hadn't really wanted to play in the first place, saw this and walked over, tugging at her pant leg and leading her towards the house. Oh my, is the little Trico worrying about Grandma? Sola smiled, squinting her eyes as she picked him up. Yes, Will said, not being coy, and nodded frankly. You're such a good child. Don't worry, Grandma is fine. You can play a little longer. Sola seemed to think that Will still wanted to play and was forcing himself to stop for her sake. Will didn't say anything, but just jumped to the ground. He couldn't explain it to her, but he could explain it to the other Pokémon. Hey, all of you, stop playing. It's time for bed. Let Grandma get some rest, Will said, pointing a finger. The scene immediately quieted down. The other Pokémon had all been wild before being taken in by Sola. They were full of gratitude for her and would naturally be considerate of her condition. Without another word, they all returned to their own nests to prepare for sleep. But the Skitty clearly still wanted to play. Seeing that everyone else had gone back, it looked at Will angrily. What? Will glared back at the Skitty, frowning. A terrifying aura emanated from his body. It was an aura that Will himself couldn't perceive, one that could only be exuded by a Pokémon that had been tempered in the era of primal beasts. Will had once been the strongest in the middle ring of MT Silver, this aura on him was only more intense. How could a hothouse flower like this Skitty withstand it? Meow. The Skitty didn't dare to meet his gaze. It lowered its head and obediently walked back into the house. Ooh, Trico, you have to get along with everyone, Sola said, looking at this scene with some concern. Although she was touched by his actions, she was worried that he would be ostracized and disliked by the other Pokémon because of it. But Will didn't care about that. After all, he wouldn't be staying here for long. But from this incident, he did get an idea. But that would have to wait for 7 days. His current body was so weak it was unbelievable. Once he was out of his infant stage, with his base stats, move pool, and battle experience, he shouldn't have any opponents below LV10, or even LV15. Chapter 111, Out of Infancy. For 5 straight days, Will loafed around at Granny Sola's house. He would wake up every morning for some exercise, help her clean the house and yard, go for a walk with her in the afternoon, and then play with the Pokémon in the backyard in the evening. The days were peaceful, but they brought a sense of tranquility to Will's heart that he had never felt in the Dragonite Kingdom. Here, he didn't have to endure the strange looks of other humans, nor did he have to worry about a war breaking out one day. In the courtyard one day, Will and Sola were relaxing on a rocking chair, sunbathing. Several Pokémon were napping around them, enjoying the quiet afternoon. With Will around these past few days, the Skitty had been much more restrained. Even Sola remarked on how much better behaved it had become. But Will knew it was only temporary. The moment he left, the Skitty would likely revert to its old ways. If I stay here any longer, I don't think I'll want to leave, Will murmured to himself, turning to look at Sola, who had fallen asleep while holding him. There were a few drops of sweat on Sola's face. They certainly weren't from the spring sun, they were from him pressing down on her. Will had now left his infant stage, and his height and weight were greater than that of an average Pokémon. Having him sleep on her stomach must have been quite uncomfortable. But even so, Sola had never asked him to move. Will shifted slightly, slipping out of her embrace and leaping lightly onto the grass without a sound. Personal status. An ordinary Pokémon needs a week to reach LV5 and mature out of its infant stage. But Will had only taken 5 days, and he had grown even more robust. He knew it wasn't because he had been sunbathing a little extra. Without a doubt, it was Celebi that had enhanced this body's growth rate. He could feel that he hadn't reached his limit yet, there was still room to grow. If he kept going, he would probably reach the standards of the era of primal beasts. As for the 2 new moves, Takedown and Slam, Will had simply recalled them from his past life's memory. He found that he had a deep impression of any move he had mastered in a past life that his current Trico body was also capable of learning. It was just like when he had evolved into a Dragonite and had recalled Rap and the others, it was quite easy. Normal type moves were very easy to recall. However, moves of other types, like Psychic and Dragon, were a bit more difficult. His body was so full of grass-type energy that he couldn't find the other energy types for the time being. Alright, it's about time I properly educated this skitty. Thinking of this, Will looked up at the skitty, who was napping under the rocking chair. That spot in Sola's arms had originally been its place, but Will had stolen it these past few days. He wanted to make the skitty experience the feeling of losing these things. Hey, get up. Will walked over to the skitty and patted its head. Meow. The skitty woke up groggily. Seeing Will in front of it, it shrank back and instinctively looked up at Sola. But this time, Sola was fast asleep and couldn't save it. Come with me. Meow. The skitty instinctively shook its head in refusal. It didn't dare to go out alone with Will. If you don't come with me, I'll beat you up, Will said, turning to intimidate it. He was no longer the tiny baby from before. He was now a little taller than the skitty. Hearing this, the skitty's eyes immediately welled up with tears, and it reluctantly followed behind him. It had never been so wronged in its entire life. Since Will had arrived, it hadn't had a single good day. Thinking about the future, it felt a sense of despair. Will glanced back at it, said nothing, and let it out the door. Although the skitty was curious as to why he was taking it out, it didn't dare to ask and just followed carefully behind him. Will led it on a stroll near the daycare. He was afraid that if they went too far, Sola would worry. Found them. At a certain point, Will stopped and looked at a trash can on the side of the street. Look over there, he said, patting the skitty beside him and pointing. The skitty followed his gaze. The trash can had been knocked over, and 3 dirty Meowth were gathered around it, picking through the trash for food. The skitty immediately showed a disgusted expression. You look down on them. Meow, the skitty nodded without any hesitation. Is that so? Come with me, Will said, grabbing one of its small ears and walking over. The 3 Meowth, seeing Will and the skitty approach, showed no hostility. Instead, they kindly made room for them, as if wanting to share their gourmet meal with the 2 strangers. Thank you, Will said, a little surprised. Although he had no intention of eating, he still had to thank them for their kindness. The era of leagues was great, even wild Pokémon could treat other species so friendly. In the era of primal beasts, it was a good day if they weren't eating each other. Meow, one of the Meowth waved a paw magnanimously, like a rich man. In its eyes, to have a whole trashkin was a great fortune. Meow, the skitty pursed its lips, annoyed by the Meowth's boorishness. Meow. The Meowth seemed to have taken a liking to the skitty and even proactively offered it a half-eaten fish to get closer. The skitty, however, wouldn't even look at it. Eat, Will said, poking its ear. Meow. The skitty shook its head firmly. Even if it was afraid of Will, it would not eat. It would absolutely not eat such dirty things. You don't want to eat? When Granny Sola doesn't want you anymore, you'll have to eat this. Might as well get used to it now. Meow meow. The skitty smacked Will with its tail. It was really angry this time. Granny Sola would never abandon it. TCH. Slam. Will took 2 steps to the side, then grabbed the skitty's neck and threw it over his shoulder. Against a domesticated Pokémon with no real battle experience and no significant level advantage, if he couldn't dominate it, he might as well just reincarnate for a 4th life. Thump. The skitty was slammed hard onto the ground and was in so much pain that it curled up and didn't dare to move. The 3 Meowth were startled and quickly rushed to stand in front of Will, not to fight him, but to try and break up the fight. Will was a little surprised by this. The 3 Meowth hadn't been scared away, they had actually come to mediate. This behavior reflected the good-natured environment of this era. Meow. The skitty looked at the three Meowth, its eyes trembling, a look of guilt in its pupils. Seeing this, Will felt it was an unexpected gain. If he could change the skitty's view of these Meowth and make them friends, that would be a good thing. In the future, if the skitty ran away again, with these street-smart Meowth looking out for it, it probably wouldn't get into too much trouble. Come on. We're going home, Will said to the skitty, then turned and walked away. Meow, the skitty lowered its head in fear and followed him. On the way back. You don't want to eat that garbage, do you? Meow, the skitty nodded vigorously. If one day, Grandma is gone, with your skill level, that's all you'll be able to eat. Meow meow. The skitty didn't understand. It didn't understand why Will kept making such assumptions. How could Grandma ever leave it? You run around all day, make trouble, and cause problems for the family. Do you know how worried that makes her? Meow. The skitty lowered its head in shame, but its voice was a little defiant. Clearly, it knew very well what it did on a daily basis. Do you know what a human's lifespan is? Meow. Don't let their tall appearance fool you. They're lucky if they live for 100 years. Do you know how old Granny Sola is this year? Meow, the skitty shook its head. Granny Sola is at least 80 years old this year. That means she'll be lucky to live for another 20 years. And after that, she'll be gone. Meow. The skitty couldn't clearly understand the concept of death. It means she'll disappear from your life forever. Just like your mother and father, who you've never seen. Completely gone. Meow. The skitty's fur stood on end. It was an expression of terror. It couldn't even imagine how horrible it would be for Granny Sola to disappear from its life forever. Meow. Now, without Will having to say anything more, the skitty asked the question itself. If you make her less angry, she'll live a little longer. Meow. Did you see what I was doing these past few days? Learn from what I did. Even if you don't do it perfectly, Granny Sola will be happy with your intentions. Will had said all he needed to say. He knew Sola had never told the skitty these things. But if she wouldn't say it, he had to. All living things in this world share a common trait, and Pokémon are no exception. You have to lose something to truly understand. Will, who had just experienced death, knew this deeply. With the skitty's original personality, it would probably only have had this realization on the day Sola died. And at that time, all that would be left for it would be regret. Regret that it hadn't been more obedient while she was alive, that it hadn't made her last days a little easier. Ordinary beings cannot turn back time. So, the only thing you can do is cherish the present. At least that way, you can make time feel like it's passing a little slower. And the memories you have in the end will be a little more beautiful. Meow, I'll do my best, the skitty said, following behind Will and looking up at the back of his head. Chapter 112, Home. Tranquility Daycare, in the courtyard. I slept for so long. It's already dark. Granny Sola opened her eyes groggily and was surprised to see a small blanket draped over her. It was the skitty's blanket. Logically, the one who would do something like this should have been the Trico. Meow, a voice sounded. Sola felt a tickle at her ankle. She looked down and saw the skitty on the ground, rubbing its cheek against her pant leg. Oh my, skitty. Are you hungry? Meow, the skitty shook its head. Not hungry? But it feels like it's about time for dinner. Sola looked around, trying to find her cane. A few seconds later, she saw the skitty dragging it over to her. Good girl, Sola smiled. She immediately realized that the Trico must have said something to the skitty this afternoon. Otherwise, with its personality, why would it ever do something like this? Meow, the skitty purred comfortably. Ever since hearing Will's words, it had begun to cherish these small gestures that it had never cared about before. Skitty, where is the Trico? Sola asked. Meow, the skitty said, walking into the house as if to lead the way. It had never noticed before how slowly Sola walked, and it deliberately slowed its own pace. When Sola followed the skitty into the living room, she noticed Will holding a book. Trico, what are you reading? Sola walked over and took a look. It was a world history book, chronicling major events from various regions. The part Will was looking at was about the Johto region. He couldn't read the words, but he could guess from the illustrations that these pages were about the Dragonite Kingdom. Are you interested in this, Trico? Let me tell you about it. This happened 1,000 years ago, Sola said, sitting down beside him. She took the book from his hands, looked at it for a moment, and then began. 1,000 years ago, the Johto region was ruled by a woman from the Dragonite clan, who established a nation called the Dragonite Kingdom. And from her mouth, Will learned what had happened after he died. He had never imagined that Liz, in her 38th year, would voluntarily abdicate and leave the kingdom she had worked so hard to build. Recalling it now, he suddenly remembered a certain night in the past, when Liz had summoned Iris's mother to the palace to discuss something. From that day on, Iris had been allowed to live in the palace. It seemed that Liz had already told her mother about her intention to pass the throne to Iris and had begun to personally train her from then on. I wonder where the founding queen went during the 60 years she was missing, Sola wondered aloud. The world of 1,000 years ago was extremely harsh. Even decades ago, she hadn't dared to wander around alone, let alone a millennium ago. Sola couldn't help but admire the queen's courage. The Dragonite clan must have a record of it, Will muttered. He could roughly guess what Liz had gone to do. Why are you looking at this, Trico? Sola asked. She felt that Will was very different from other Pokémon. At an age when other Pokémon were still eating, sleeping, and playing, he was cleaning, reading books, and teaching children. Are there really Pokémon that are so mature and steady from birth? He was as mature as an adult. Granny, I want to go here, Will said, pointing a finger at an illustration in the book. The picture was a rough depiction of the Dragonite capital from 1,000 years ago. The Dragonite capital? You want to go there? Yes. Will nodded eagerly, seeing that she understood. Hiss, where is the Dragonite capital of 1,000 years ago now? Sola asked, getting a bit of a headache. She didn't know what he wanted to do there, but she still wanted to help him. 1,000 years. So much can change. Let me see, don't be anxious, Sola said, flipping to the first few pages of the book, which had a modern map of the Johto region. The plain where the Dragonite capital once stood has now basically become mountains and forests. The capital is gone, but the descendants of the people who lived there have moved to Blackthorn City, Sola said, pointing to a city surrounded by mountains in the upper right of the map. Will looked at the map and nodded, not very surprised. He imprinted it in his mind. The western half of the MT Silver Road had become a mountain? The question had just appeared in his mind when Sola answered it. Look here. This used to be a mountain road connecting Kanto and Johto. But later, during the Three Kingdoms War, a Tyranitar dozens of meters tall came out of MT Silver. With just one earthquake, it caused a massive landslide that sealed the road. To this day, it's become a mountain. Sola looked at the map and couldn't help but sigh at the power of Pokémon. They say that Queen Liz's Pokémon, Lan, was a Dragonite even more powerful than that Tyranitar. He had the great title of Guardian Dragon of the Nation. Hey? Will was stunned, scratching his head. Since when was he stronger than a Tyranitar? Do you want to go to Blackthorn City, Trico? If so, Grandma can take you for a visit in a few days. No, I can go by myself, Will shook his head, refusing her kind offer and patting his chest. Sola was too old for long boat or plane rides. You want to go by yourself? That's too dangerous. I have to go. Will's tone and expression were firm. Even if she couldn't understand his words, she understood his meaning. When do you plan to leave? Sola, seeing his resolve, didn't try to persuade him further. Now, Will said, standing up. He wasn't actually in a hurry, but staying longer would only make the parting harder. Leave tomorrow. Tomorrow, Grandma will take you to the port, Sola said, not leaving any room for refusal. Meow the Skitty, who had been listening quietly, came forward. She had thought Will would stay here forever. She hadn't wanted him to stay before, but now that he was leaving, she felt uneasy. What if she couldn't take good care of Granny Sola? You can do it. Believe in yourself, Will said, reaching out to stroke the Skitty's head. It was the first time he had been so gentle with her. So fluffy, the texture is so nice. No wonder this Pokémon is so popular, Will thought. He couldn't resist giving it a big hug, which took the Skitty by surprise. The final meal. Sola had put a lot of heart into it, it was a sumptuous feast. I have a friend who's a captain at the port. I've asked him to take you to Cherry Grove City in the Johto region. You don't have to worry, Sola said. Thank you, Grandma, Will replied. Hearing this, one of his worries was lifted. At the same time, he thought to himself, Cherry Grove City. 1,000 years ago, that place was still called Jubilance Town. He wondered what had become of the isolated island, and if it had become a desolate wasteland like in the games. Eat more. You might be on a boat for a few days, Sola nagged. You won't get much good food at sea, so you'll have to endure it. When you get to the Johto region, see if any kind people are willing to give you something good to eat for the road. If it rains, remember to take shelter. You're still so small, what will you do if you run into bad people? As she spoke, Sola looked like she was about to cry. The skitty, hearing how miserable Will's future life was going to be, also lost its appetite and offered him its own food. Don't worry, Grandma. I can survive, Will waved a hand, comforting her. He had survived in MT Silver in the era of primal beasts, how could he not survive in the era of leagues? At worst, his life would just be a little tougher. But it certainly wouldn't be as tough as it was back then. That evening, Sola went into the courtyard alone and then returned to her room, not coming out again. The next morning, she led Will and the skitty to the seaport. At the port, they waited for Sola to bring over a sturdy-looking middle-aged man. Trico, this is Tom. He'll be the one to take you to Cherry Grove City. Well now, this Trico is a pretty big fella, isn't he? You're as good as they say, Auntie Sola. Your Pokémon care is first-rate, said Tom, a very energetic-looking man. His boat was a medium-sized speedboat that looked very new. Beside his leg was an equally energetic corphish, waving its pincers in greeting. Go on now, Sola said, handing Will a small backpack. Okay. Will stepped forward and gave both Sola and the skitty a hug, then took the backpack and jumped onto the speedboat. All right, we're off, Tom said, heading to the front of the boat. You're not going to look inside the backpack? Now's the time to say what you want to say, you know. A real man says a proper goodbye. Tom said without turning back. Will knew he was talking to him. Hearing this, he opened the backpack. He was indeed a little curious what Sola had prepared. What would a Pokémon need to bring? Food? Inside were a few small sets of children's clothes, a box of colorful macarons, and a small glass frame with a letter. Inside the frame was a pressed white flower, one of the ones Sola cherished. These were things Sola must have stayed up all night to make. In that moment, Will's eyes and nose began to sting. He looked up, towards the shore. Sola and the skitty had not yet disappeared. Will bowed deeply in her direction. Trico, you be safe now. If you are ever unhappy out there, you come back, you hear? Tranquility Daycare in Evergrande City, this will always be your home. Granny Sola's gentle voice carried across the sea breeze and into his ears. In this strange era, he had finally found his home. Chapter 113, You're hacking, aren't you? The afternoon of the first day. Trico. Captain Tom, who was steering the boat, heard the sound and turned his head. The Trico that Granny Sola had sent along was holding a letter and looking at him, as if it needed help. Oh? What is it, Trico? A real man has to ask for what he needs loud and proud, you know. I can't read this. I want you to help me read it, Will said. He knew Tom couldn't understand him, but the corphish beside him could. He knew this letter from Sola wasn't meant for him. How could a Pokémon read human writing? This letter must have been intended for some future person who might meet him. He was a little curious. Hey. Just as he expected, after hearing him, the corphish waved its pincers at Tom. It pointed at the letter in Will's hand, and Tom immediately understood. This was the kind of rapport that existed between a trainer and their Pokémon. Only when they truly liked and cherished each other could they understand what the other was saying. Let's see here, Tom said, taking the letter. He first checked the boat's course, then opened the envelope. A moment later, he nodded and read the contents aloud. Hello, kind stranger. My child, Trico, has embarked on a new journey alone. He is a very gentle and kind child. Just a week ago, he was still a tiny baby who struggled just to eat a biscuit. Because of this, I am afraid he will be deceived by bad people or bullied by other Pokémon. If you are reading this letter and Trico has encountered difficulties, I implore you to lend him a hand and help him just a little. If he is in a crisis and you are unwilling to intervene, please call the number below and contact me immediately. I will come and bring him home. If you have already become his trainer, then I beg you, please take good care of him. His potential is very high. He will not let you down. I wish you peace and safety. Sola, Tranquility Daycare, Evergrande City. Will stood there quietly, listening, not missing a single word. Auntie Sola really likes you, loud and proud, Tom said. Will nodded, silent. He took the letter back from Tom and sat on the stern of the boat, just looking at it. It was true, he couldn't read the words. But he could feel the power coming from the letter, a power that shook his soul. He stared at it for a long time, as if trying to match the words to what Tom had said. After a while, he slowly raised his head and looked out at the calm sea. Hey hey! The noisy cry sounded again as the corpfish appeared at his side. You're right. It's a beautiful afternoon. The sun is warm on my face. It's a happy feeling, Will said, a gentle smile on his face, just like Sola's. Hey hey! Suddenly, the corpfish's expression turned sharp. It pulled out two small fishing rods from behind its back. Judging by their length, they were clearly children's toys. It looked like this was what Tom used to keep it entertained. All right, let's have a match, Will grinned, taking one of the rods. The corpfish wanted to have a fishing competition. Will figured that since it would take 3 to 5 days to get from Evergrande to Cherry Grove, and he had nothing else to do, he might as well fish. It could also supplement their meals. Hey, the corpfish got a sharp look on its face and skillfully cast its line. How ridiculous, Will muttered, glancing at it. He dropped his own bare hook into the sea. There's no way I'm catching anything without bait. I'll just play along. Hey! Splash! A huge commotion erupted next to him. The corpfish was already reeling in its line, a bright red Magikarp hanging from the end. Will was stunned. But on second thought, it was a Magikarp, so maybe biting a bare hook wasn't that strange. He then watched the corpfish use knock off to feint the Magikarp and toss it back into the sea. Wait, that's right. I can fish and battle water-type Pokémon to level up. I'm a grass type. Will's mind lit up. The ocean was the perfect training ground. This was a lesson he had learned from his past life. The ocean was full of countless Pokémon of every level, from 1 to 70. And now that he was a grass type, he had an advantage against them. If not now, when? Even if this bare hook could only catch Magikarp. Hey! Splash! Will's eyes nearly popped out of his head. A shiny Phoebus was hanging from the corpfish's line. This time, Will was just plain dumbstruck. One Pokémon, using a child's toy rod with no bait, had just caught a rare shiny Phoebus. Was this real? Yes, Phoebus were so ugly that trainers didn't catch them and other Pokémon didn't want to eat them, so their population was huge, almost as large as Magikarps. But this was a shiny. In the real world, you might find only a few shinies out of a million Phoebus. And unlike the brainless Magikarp, Phoebus were mostly timid and cowardly. How would one dare to bite a bare hook? Hey! While Will was still in a daze, the corpfish used knock off again, sending the shiny Phoebus flying back into the water. The sight almost made Will cough up blood and die. A shiny Phoebus. That was rarer than a pseudo-legendary. When it evolved into a shiny melodic, it would be the dream Pokémon of countless trainers. There were collectors in the world who loved Phoebus and melodic so much they would spend their entire fortunes just to get a shiny one. And this golden mountain, this absolute treasure, had just been smacked back into the sea like a common fish by this corpfish. Will looked over at his own, completely motionless fishing rod. His spirit broke. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You're hacking. Will stood up, threw the stupid toy rod aside, and ran over to shake the corpfish by its head. Corpfish! Hey hey! I'm hacking just because I'm good at fishing. The corpfish shrugged, looking utterly invincible. Ha ha ha! Trico, don't even try to compete with him. That corpfish has beaten every single one of my fishing buddies in Evergrande City, loud and proud. Captain Tom called from the bow, laughing hard. Hey hey, corpfish set its rod aside and waved its pincers. What, you have a secret to teach me? Will raised an eyebrow, leaning in. Fishing was a good skill that could be passed down for 10 or 100 lifetimes. He had to learn it. Hey, it's nothing but practice, man, the corpfish said quietly. Will's brow furrowed, a number appearing on his forehead. In his 3 lifetimes, he had never met such a smug Pokémon. But Captain Tom's next words made him realize he had misunderstood. That corpfish has been fishing for over 20 years. Back in the day, the two of us saved up the money we made from fishing to buy this speedboat. Those were tough times, but we got through them, loud and proud. 20 years. Will's eyes widened as he looked at the seemingly dopey corphish. He really couldn't tell that it was over 20 years old. And if it had been fishing for that long, it should have evolved into a crawdont by now. Will even walked around it, looking for an everstone, but didn't see one. Hey, the corphish said, not knowing what Will was looking for. It just went back to fishing. After that, Will did nothing but sit there and stare at it. And the more he watched, the more he realized something was wrong. With his eye for it, he could judge a Pokémon's rough level just by its size and the strength of its moves. This corphish's level is definitely over LV 30. It's probably LV 45. But why hasn't it evolved? Will frowned, unable to understand. Without an Everstone, it was very difficult for a Pokémon to resist the impulse to evolve. Even if it could resist for a while, it couldn't resist forever. As its level continued to rise, the urge would grow stronger and stronger until it couldn't be suppressed. But this corphish was 15 levels past its evolution point and hadn't evolved. It didn't look like it was in pain, either. It was living a happy life without any tendency to evolve. This was clearly not right. Maybe there was something wrong with its body. Corphish, did anything special ever happen to you? Will decided to ask, wondering if there was a way to solve the problem. Although Tom was only giving him a ride because of Sola, Will still wanted to repay his kindness if he could. Evolving wasn't a small thing. He was afraid that if this physical problem was left unchecked, it could cause big trouble later on, or even cost it its life. Hey, the corphish scratched its head, then seemed to remember something important. Oh? What was it? Will's eyes lit up. If they could find the cause of the problem, maybe they could solve it. Hey, the corphish replied with a smile. But the answer had nothing to do with what Will was asking. The corphish said that a long time ago, it had made a promise in its heart, to protect Tom and his speedboat with its life. This kind of promise was not strange in the Pokémon world. Every Pokémon made promises to its trainer in its heart. To protect one's trainer with one's life was something every Pokémon would do. But in the corphish's mind, this was a special experience. Chapter 114, Evolution in a Day. The next day, early in the morning, Will was unable to get any useful information from the corphish. And he couldn't communicate properly with Tom. He could only let the matter of corphish's non-evolution rest for now. In any case, judging by its condition, it didn't seem to be in any discomfort and was living happily. Hey. I'm too lazy to fish. Hey. That's a lie. Will rolled over, refusing to be baited by the corphish's taunts. Besides, it was too inefficient for him to catch his own fish to battle. It was much better to let the corphish do the fishing while he beat up whatever it reeled in. Hey! Splash! Hearing the sound of the water breaking, Will rolled over and hopped up. He looked over. It was a Carvanha. The moment they saw this fish, both Will and the corphish's expressions changed. Leaf. Will channeled his grass-type energy, formed a large, sharp leaf, and shot it at the Carvanha. Thwack! The Carvanha's level wasn't high, and with the type disadvantage, it was instantly knocked out. Hey! The corphish quickly shouted to Captain Tom at the bow. Tom looked back, saw the fainted Carvanha on the deck, and his face immediately tensed. He made a 180-degree turn, steering the speedboat in another direction. The corphish had expected this, but Will, caught off guard, stumbled and fell to the deck. He looked at Tom in confusion. He didn't know much about Carvanha, only that if one appeared near a boat, there were probably at least 4 more under the hull, and they would likely attack. With their teeth, they were fully capable of chewing a hole in the bottom of a ship. Hey! The corphish helped Will up and explained. Carvanha are pack Pokémon, and each pack has its own territory. If they discover an intruder, they will bare their fangs without mercy and attack as a group. The noise a boat makes is considered an intrusion. Many ships had been sunk by Carvanha attacks, so sailors on the sea would never proactively go near their habitats. This Carvanha appearing meant they had likely strayed into its pack's territory. That was why Tom had immediately turned the boat around to leave, not hesitating for a second. Even if it meant going off course, it was better than the ship sinking. So that's how it is, Will nodded, having learned something new. He really didn't know the habits of some of the more obscure Pokémon. Once the boat was a safe distance away, Will swept the Carvanha off the deck and back into the sea with his tail, then continued his new training plan. As soon as the Corphish pulled a fish up, he would immediately attack. If it pulled up something high level that he couldn't beat, the Corphish would step in and handle it itself. In Will's opinion, the LV-45 Corphish wasn't weak, but it wasn't overwhelmingly strong either. But out here on the open sea, it rarely met its match. Most of the Pokémon that could be reeled in by the Corphish weren't particularly bright. Most were low-level. High-level Pokémon, even if they weren't smart, generally had enough experience not to bite a random hook. So, most of the Pokémon the Corphish reeled in were no match for Will. Under these conditions, Will managed to reach LV-16 in a single day and, as night fell, he was enveloped in the light of evolution. The light of evolution at night was like a flashbang, shining even brighter than a lighthouse beacon over the sea. Hey? So fast! Tom, who was reading a newspaper in the cabin, was drawn by the light and hurried out to watch. The evolution of a Pokémon, 1,000 years in the past or 1,000 years in the future, it was something people would never get tired of seeing. It was a leap of life, a qualitative transformation, the very magic of Pokémon. Especially in this early era of leagues, Pokémon evolution was not such a frequent event. Tom naturally couldn't miss it, forcing his eyes wide to stare into the bright light. After the light faded, Will's new form was revealed. Grovel. Whoa, that's a huge grovel. Auntie Sola was right, that Trico's potential really is extraordinary. Tom couldn't help but marvel, looking at Will's new size. A normal grovel was less than a meter tall, but this one, having just evolved, was already 1.5 meters. But for Tom, no matter how good Will's talent was, it had nothing to do with him. He wasn't some ambitious guy, he didn't need a powerful Pokémon by his side. Having the Corphish with him made him happy enough. He took another look, then turned and went back into the cabin. Steering a boat all day was tiring. Now that the sea was calm and the course was steady, the most important thing was to get some rest. Hey! Compared to Tom, the Corphish was much more impressed. It stared wide-eyed, circling the newly evolved Will. Just a moment ago, the Trico had been about the same size as it, and now it was suddenly this big. Moreover, many Pokémon in this world, especially wild ones, had no concept of their own evolution. Some would only understand after hearing it from humans or seeing a member of their own species evolve. Ash's Sobble was a clear example. The Corphish didn't know much about evolution, which was why it was so surprised. Will ignored the Corphish, focusing on his own changes. A Trico was often mistaken for a frog, but now that he had evolved into a grovel, he wouldn't be mistaken anymore. My speed feels so much faster, Will thought, moving his legs. His limbs were much longer, which undoubtedly made his movements more agile. Personal status. 10 levels in one day. Potential is orange. Without a doubt, this is Celebi's power. As someone in his third life, Will knew just how absurd this rate of change was. Even with Iris's Dragon Force accelerating his growth in his past life, he had never leveled up this fast. And what's more, a grovel's base stat total was clearly only 405, which should have been just barely in the purple tier. But his potential was now orange. Although it was his first time seeing it, he could guess that orange was the color between purple, 400+, and gold, 600+, symbolizing a BST of 500+. Absolutely ridiculous. And what's with this body? Am I not an era of League's Pokémon? How is my body developing to the era of Primal Beast standard? Can Celebi's power change that too? Will looked himself over carefully and found that he was indeed a little different from the grovel in the Pokédex. It was subtle, but the leaves on his body were a vibrant, emerald green, instead of a deep forest green. He couldn't perceive what effect this had yet, but he was certain that his potential in this life would be no less than his last one as a Drago Knight. I can feel it. He suddenly muttered. Hey! The Corphish heard him and quickly brought its face close. You wouldn't understand. Watch this. Will shook his head, then clenched his right fist. Bzzzt. A faint spark of electricity crackled from his fist, but quickly vanished into the night air. Hey! The Corphish, seeing the spark, jumped back several steps, clearly startled. That was clearly the power of electricity. It had suffered badly at the hands of electric-type Pokémon before and was terrified of it. It failed, Will said, looking down at his fist. Although the attempt had failed, the fact that he could channel electric energy at all was a very good sign. After evolving, he could gradually sense the other types of energy within his body. They weren't abundant, in fact, they were almost completely suppressed by his grass energy. He would have to actively train and strengthen these powers to be able to use the moves from his past life. Just now, he had been trying to recall Thunder Punch. Besides Thunder Punch, as a grovel, he could also recall Agility and Dragon Tail. And there were 4 other moves he could recall that were not from his past life, but from his new species: False Swipe, Fury Cutter, X-Scissor, and Energy Ball. There's plenty of time. I'll take it slow. In this life, I'm in no hurry. Will analyzed the gains from his evolution, then lay down on the deck to sleep. Hey hey! The Corphish poked him with a pincer. What? Will turned to look at it. The Corphish was holding 2 small blankets. They looked like the ones it usually slept with. Tom gave these to you. Hey, the Corphish nodded, offering one of the blankets to Will. It then used the other to cover its own body, lay down on the deck, and closed its eyes. Will took the small blanket and rubbed it. The material was very good and comfortable to the touch. It was clear that Tom had put a lot of thought into picking them out. The blanket was too small, it only covered Will's stomach. But it was enough. He felt warm, inside and out. Chapter 115, A Bizarre Heist. Another morning. Will woke from his sleep and looked around in confusion at the total darkness. But a Pokémon's night vision varies, and a grovel's isn't bad. He could see that he was locked in a cage, and the outside was covered by a cloth. How is this possible? Will wasn't panicking, just stroking his chin and analyzing the situation. With the high level of alertness he had honed from years in the wild, if anything had happened on the sea or if someone had approached him, he should have woken up immediately. And yet, he had slept right through being put in a cage? It wasn't Captain Tom or his Corphish. So who was it? Will frowned. Although only Tom and Corphish had been on the speedboat when he fell asleep, he felt that they were both genuinely friendly, not just putting on an act. Besides, neither a human nor a Corphish could move without making a sound, especially on a flat deck, which would at least creak. He certainly would have woken up before they even got close, let alone let them put him in a cage. Will reached behind him. His backpack was still there. He checked the weight, nothing seemed to be missing. This made him let out a sigh of relief. Hey hey! Bang! A familiar, spastic sound came from nearby, making Will relax with a small smile. Although the Corphish was obnoxious, hearing its voice in this situation was genuinely stress-relieving. And, just as Will had expected, it wasn't Corphish and Tom who had done this. At this very moment, the Corphish was angrily cussing out their captor, hammering the cage with its pincers, spitting out all sorts of childish insults. They were just variations of bad guy, scumbag, hateful jerk, and the like. Not very threatening. However, the sound of the Corphish constantly smashing the cage was a bit of a problem. If a LV-40 Corphish couldn't break this cage, there was no point in Will even wasting the energy to try. So, Will sat down cross-legged, sinking into thought. There weren't many who could pull this off. The group of culprits was already fairly obvious. The perpetrator was either a ghost-type Pokémon or a psychic-type Pokémon. The former could approach without a sound. The latter could have used telekinesis from a distance. And their level must be high, Will nodded, his mind made up. He was currently only LV-16. But you wouldn't find another LV-16 grovel on the planet with his stats. If any Pokémon below LV-30 had tried to pull a stunt like this, he would have reacted immediately and attacked, whether he could win or not. We'll have to rely on the Corphish for now. Will sat quietly in the cage, waiting, closing his eyes to recover his energy. He knew the culprit would show up eventually. After some time had passed, the Corphish next to him had finally exhausted itself and stopped shouting. Will felt he could finally get some peace. That noise was killing me. Clack, rrrrrr. The sound of a metal shutter door rolling up echoed through the room. Hey hey hey. The moment Will opened his eyes, he heard the Corphish start cussing again. My, aren't we energetic? My luck is really quite good, a shrill male voice sounded, reminding Will of a stereotypical eunuch from a TV drama. The cloth covering the cages was ripped away. Will squinted his eyes, adjusting to the light, and looked outside. Standing in the doorway was an alternative-looking man with long, sea-blue hair that covered the right side of his face. They were in a ship's cargo hold. Although Will couldn't see the ocean from inside the cage, he could hear the sound of the waves. They were still at sea. This was bad news. The ocean was vast. Even if the police knew they had been taken, they wouldn't find them anytime soon. And even if they did manage to escape the cage, there was nowhere to run. Hey, the corphish, seeing the light again, waved its pincers at Will in greeting. What a genius, Will sighed, shaking his head at the dopey creature. The corphish had brawn, but no brains. He would have to think his way out of this one himself. He looked around. Tom was gone. Instead, he saw dozens of eggs in glass incubators. Pokémon poachers? He wondered. Oh my, such a strong and healthy grovel. Just looking at him makes me quiver, the blue-haired man said, walking up to Will's cage to observe him closely. Will remained expressionless, but a cold chill ran down his spine. Don't tell me I've run into some kind of pervert who's into Pokémon? If he just liked Pokémon, he could understand. After all, the official Diamond and Pearl version games had explicitly stated that in the past, humans and Pokémon did, in fact, marry, and it was considered a normal thing. But that past was a very long time ago, from an era when humans and Pokémon were considered the same. This was the League era. Marrying Pokémon should have been unheard of for a long time. Thankfully, the man didn't seem to have those kinds of intentions. He turned his attention to the corphish. Looks like a dimwit. Shouldn't cause any trouble. Hey. The corphish immediately exploded in anger. Medicham, please explain the situation to our two little friends and get them to behave, the man said, pointing behind Will, and then turned to leave the cargo hold. Will turned around. Standing outside the cage behind him was a pink Pokémon, seemingly dancing in place. The sight nearly gave him a heart attack. Has that thing been dancing there this whole time? And neither of us noticed? Will swallowed hard, carefully observing the Medichsam's movements. He realized it wasn't just dancing, it was a unique form of meditation. It was wrapping its entire body in psychic energy to erase its presence and continuously raise its internal energy threshold. What made it unique was that most Medicham accomplished this through yoga, only this one did it through dance. Cham. Hearing the man, the Medicham didn't stop its movements. Its eyes glowed with blue energy, and a telepathic wave entered the minds of both Will and the corphish. There was no sound, but they understood its meaning. Thieves, Will thought, raising an eyebrow at their bizarre operation. This blue-haired man was a professional thief. He specialized in stealing eggs from Pokémon League-affiliated daycares and Pokémon hospitals in various regions. And his buyers were the Pokémon Leagues of other regions. It wasn't that the League was hiring him. Rather, the League had issued a notice years ago stating that anyone who found abandoned eggs or young Pokémon could turn them into the League for a cash reward. This guy was farming that reward money. He would have dozens of subordinates from different home regions turn in the stolen eggs and Pokémon in small batches to their local leagues. It was worth noting that if any of the young Pokémon matured past their infant stage during this time, they would simply be released into the wild, not killed. So they have some standards. Not many, but some. Better than the poachers of the future. As for the leagues, since many Pokémon eggs and babies look identical, the receiving league would have no idea they were stolen property from another region. And since communication between regional leagues at this time still relied on landline telephones, it gave these thieves the perfect opening. This operation was just wild. Stealing from the League to sell back to the League. According to the Medicham, they had no intention of harming Will or the corphish. They would simply be dropped off on a nearby deserted island. After they had successfully cashed in all the eggs, they would send an anonymous tip to the authorities about their location. Hey. The corphish didn't care about any of this. It just wanted to know where Tom was. Cham the Medicham responded that the human was locked in another room and was in no danger. Hearing this, the corphish finally calmed down. The cargo hold fell quiet. The corphish, knowing Tom was safe, lay down and promptly fell asleep. The Medicham continued its silent dance, training its psychic power. Will sat cross-legged, studying the surrounding Pokémon eggs. He had counted 46 of them. That meant there had to be at least 46 people on this ship, right? After all, finding 1 or 2 abandoned eggs in the wild might be plausible, but 3 or 4 in 1 week would be highly unusual. If this crew was turning in eggs in batches, their numbers probably weren't far off from the number of eggs. Assuming every person has 1 LV20 Pokémon, we're definitely outnumbered, Will sighed, giving up any thoughts of a breakout. That Medicham alone was at least LV40 and could easily handle the corphish. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't fight 40 LV20 Pokémon. He had originally thought about trying to save the eggs, but now it seemed impossible. It was better to just leave it to the police. Anyway, the Pokémon wouldn't be harmed and would end up back with the league eventually. No need to risk his neck. In this era, surviving in the wild wasn't that difficult. All he had to do now was wait. Wait to be dumped on an island, and wait for rescue. However, something interesting soon happened. That night, Will was awakened by a rhythmic flashing light. He opened his eyes. One of the green eggs was about to hatch. Chapter 116, The Furious Corphish. Poor little guy, Will said, shaking his head as he looked at the flashing egg. Being born early might be a good thing in other circumstances, but in this situation, it was a disaster. If this Pokémon hadn't been turned over to the League within 7 days, it would most likely be released into the wild. A LV5 Pokémon trying to survive in the wild, even if it lived, it wouldn't be a good life. But he just sighed. There was nothing he could do to save it right now. He rolled over, turning away from the light, and went back to sleep. The next morning, he opened his eyes. He saw the blue-haired man holding the egg with a troubled expression. Will just grinned. Cham. It's too late. The closest drop-off is the Indigo League in the Johto region, but we were just there. This time we have to go to Sinnoh. That's at least another 4 or 5 days. Counting the travel time, this Pokémon definitely won't make it in time. The blue-haired man scratched his head. A Pokémon egg or an infant could be exchanged for a lot of money at the League. The market was worse every year, and the reward from the League was less and less. They risked so much to steal these eggs, losing one now was, of course, a painful loss. Cham. Looks like we can only, wait a minute, Medicham, look over there. Suddenly, the man noticed Will's gaze, and he turned, holding the egg. Will hadn't expected to be dragged into this just by watching the show. Grovel, this egg is yours now. Take it with you when you disembark, the man said, approaching the cage and taking out a key to unlock it. Seeing the cage open, Will stood his ground, not moving. The man nodded in satisfaction and then handed the green egg to him. Will took the egg, having no intention of wasting words on the man, nor of trying to run. Setting aside the fact that the Medicham was watching him like a hawk, there was no point in escaping the cage. As for the egg, it's fine, I'll take it. When I get to the Johto region, I'll find a good home for this kid, Will thought, looking down at the egg in his arms with a somewhat dazed expression. He was reminded of the days he had spent hatching his Zubat on MT Silver. He wondered how his Golbat was doing now. The history books hadn't recorded that. Will sat down with the egg, using his body heat to keep it warm. His Golbat was different from Charizard and Gliscor. After all, those two had been picked up and had spent more time with Liz. But he had personally hatched that Golbat and raised it for a long time. But unfortunately, the books didn't record much about those specific Pokémon from 1,000 years ago. His own records as the Guardian Dragon were plentiful, but 90% of it was fabricated nonsense that didn't match the historical facts. The egg flashed, and would even tremble occasionally. The little one inside seemed to be excited by the warmth of its parent. Nearby, no one could have understood the shock the Corphish felt when it woke up and saw its good buddy, Grovel, hatching an egg. Hey hey! The Corphish stood in its cage, staring blankly at Grovel. Its expression turned from confusion to grief and then to fury. Gradually, the Corphish turned bright red, like a boiled lobster. Hey hey hey! Hey hey! You bastards! What did you do to my buddy last night? He's not even a month old. Hey hey! Let me out! I'm gonna fight you to the death! Hey, you're so loud! Quiet down, Will said, adjusting the egg and frowning at the Corphish. Although its heart was in the right place, he really didn't want to listen to its antics right now. Hey! The Corphish rattled the cage bars, weeping. But after crying for a while, it just fell asleep, snot bubbles popping from its nose. Will didn't know how much time had passed, but he felt the eggs flashing was getting faster. With his experience hatching his Zubat, he knew the baby was about to come out, probably in 3 or 4 hours at most. Just as he was preparing to welcome the baby in his cage, the ship stopped. Looks like it's time to get off, Will said, lifting his eyes from the egg and looking outside the cargo hold. As expected, the blue-haired man had appeared again. Time to get off, you two little ones. Hey hey! Hearing this, the Corphish woke up instantly. The next moment, the Medicham appeared from behind the man, waved its hands, and a blue telekinetic energy lifted both giant iron cages, moving them out of the cargo hold. Only after leaving the ship did Will get a clear look. It was a medium-sized pirate ship. Just from what he could see, there were 70 or 80 people on board. But the ship was in tatters, it looked like it had recently been through a battle. They must have stolen it from a group of pirates. No wonder you don't care if we see you, Will muttered, clutching the egg. They were 2 Pokémon. Even if they saw the ship, how could they describe it to humans? And even if they could, the ship would probably be scuttled by the time they reached Sinnoh. This crew would definitely switch ships. Memorizing this one was useless, the police would only be able to find it at the bottom of the ocean. And even if the maritime police found them before they reached their destination, this group had nothing to fear. They didn't look like pirates. They could just say they'd stolen the ship from pirates, and that the eggs were stolen by them, too. As for remembering their faces, Will looked at the blue-haired man. He was too generic. If he changed his hair color, Will probably wouldn't recognize him in a few days. And in the corefish's eyes, all humans probably looked the same, just as he couldn't tell the subtle differences between Pokémon of the same species. This little island doesn't look like it has much to eat. I'll have someone leave you some food and water. You be good and wait for rescue, okay? The blue-haired man said with a wave. The Medicham then moved the 2 large cages off the ship and onto the shore. Will observed his surroundings. This wasn't so much an island as it was a giant, barren reef. You could see the other side from where they stood. There wasn't a single blade of grass. Hey hey! The moment the corfish landed, it saw Tom in another cage, lying motionless. It immediately went frantic. Calm down. Captain Tom is probably just unconscious. He's not injured. These people didn't hurt him. He'll wake up soon, Will called out, calming the corfish. He was worried that if it overreacted, the man and his Medicham might not bother unlocking their cages. Hey, the corfish heard this, nodded, and waited impatiently, silent. Thump. 2 wooden boxes were tossed down. They likely contained the food and water. Then, the blue-haired man and the Medicham floated down to the beach, took out a key, and unlocked all 3 cages. Hey hey! The corfish shot out and immediately rushed to Tom's side. It watched him for a few seconds, then put its head to his chest and listened, only then confirming that Tom was indeed fine. But it wasn't about to let the man leave. Hey hey! The corfish chased after the blue-haired man and the Medicham, shouting angrily. It was asking them where they had put Tom's speedboat. This is not good, Will thought, feeling that something bad was about to happen. He knew how much that speedboat meant to the corfish. He thought back carefully but didn't remember seeing the speedboat on the pirate ship. A crew like this would never bring it on board, it was evidence. If they had just left it behind, it could be dealt with. Will swallowed, his gaze shifting to the deck of the pirate ship. A dozen or so people had gathered, urging the blue-haired man to come back. Every one of them had a Pokémon by their side, and none looked to be below LV 25. That speedboat? What do you think? Obviously we destroyed it. If it was found. Fwoosh fwoosh fwoosh. Before the man could finish, the corfish's eyes went red, and it unleashed a bubble beam. But the Medicham had been watching it the whole time. It instantly blocked with a psi beam. The commotion was not small, and the people on the pirate ship, hearing the noise, all began to come ashore. Stop it! It's just a boat. Be careful, they'll attack Tom. Will yelled, running to the corfish's side and grabbing it. No matter what their code was, these people were still criminals. Who knew if they would kill them all and dump them in the sea if they were pushed too far? Hey, hey! I'm letting you go out of the goodness of my heart, and you attack me? Did you really think we wouldn't hurt you? The blue-haired man's expression hardened as he threw up his hands. Hey hey! The corfish shoved Will to the ground and charged forward with its pincers raised. TCH, the blue-haired man clicked his tongue. The next moment, 7 or 8 attacks shot out from behind him. Flamethrower, Razor Leaf, Thunderbolt, Mud Shot, Ice Beam, Water Pulse. The power of each move looked like it came from a Pokémon above LV 30. If the corfish took that hit, it would be in a world of hurt. And on this isolated reef, being seriously injured was no different from being dead. Will put the egg down on the ground and shot forward with extreme speed. His speed was so fast that even the blue-haired man stumbled back a step in shock. But Will's target wasn't him. The Medicham was blocking the man with detect, he couldn't get to him even with extreme speed, and there was no point. His target was the Corphish. Boom! Will slammed into the Corphish from the side. Because his level was low, his attack power wasn't strong, but his sheer speed and force were enough to tackle the Corphish and send them both tumbling aside. Kaboom! The 7 or 8 attacks missed them and slammed into the reef, causing a small explosion. Will ignored the blast, gritting his teeth as he pushed himself up. Using extreme speed with his current body was just like using double edge. In his past life, his reaction time couldn't keep up. Now, it was the opposite, his nerves could, but his body couldn't support it. Chapter 117, I broke a man's promise. You. Will stood up, intending to scold the Corphish for not reading the room. But when he saw the usually carefree Pokémon lying on the ground, choking back sobs, he forgot what he was going to say. He turned to look at the blue-haired man and his accomplices. Well? Should we knock them all out? One of the men asked, walking up to their leader. The blue-haired man raised his chin, glancing at the Corphish and then at the egg on the ground. Forget it, he sneered, turning and leaving with his crew. Phew! Will breathed a sigh of relief as he watched the pirate ship sail away. Recover. Using the skill for the first time, a faint green light glowed on Will's body. Under the sunlight, the emerald green leaves on his arms shone even more brightly. At the same time, he felt his condition improve considerably, the pain from using extreme speed had already faded by more than half. Only then did he look over at the Corphish, which was still lying on the ground whimpering. He shook his head. It was probably best to let it be for a while. He picked up the Pokémon egg, walked to the edge of the reef, used his long tail to scoop up some water, and splashed it on Tom's face. NGHH. After all that commotion, a splash of water was all Tom needed to wake up. He sat up, dazed, and looked around, seemingly remembering what had happened. Ah, what rotten luck, Tom said, surprisingly laid back. He just scratched the back of his head. Dude, look at him, Will said, pointing a finger at the Corphish still playing dead. Corphish, what are you doing lying over there? At Tom's call, the Corphish just turned its back to them. What's wrong with him? Tom asked, looking at Will in confusion. He then noticed the egg in Will's arms but was more concerned about his partner. I was about to ask you the same thing, Will shrugged. If Tom, his trainer, didn't know, how could an outsider who had only known him for a few days know? By the way, where's my boat? I thought you'd already noticed, Will said, making a gesture with his hands. He could only try his best to mime the boat being destroyed, it was up to Tom to understand. I see. The boat's gone, Tom understood. He raised a hand and wiped his eyes, remaining silent for a long time before finally sighing. Maybe this is just fate. Leaving that cryptic remark hanging in the air, Tom stood up and walked over to sit beside his Corphish. Will curiously followed but kept his distance to listen. Hey, what are you so sad about? Tom asked, patting Corphish's back. Hey! I broke a man's promise. Ha ha ha, that's nothing. You gotta look on the bright side. Tom put his hands on his hips and burst out laughing, so hard it looked like he was about to cry. Hey hey! You're the one who said it. What did I say? Tom asked, confused. Hey hey! A promise made by a man must always be kept, loud and proud. The Corphish jumped up, looking at Tom angrily, as if scolding him for forgetting his own words. But Corphish didn't realize that its words had just struck two people silent. You still remember that? Tom's laughter faded. He sat back, supporting himself on the reef with his hands, and looked out at the ocean. Doesn't this scene feel familiar? Hey, the Corphish said. Of course, it knew what Tom was talking about. After all, it was on a giant reef just like this one that they had become partners. Over 20 years ago. The regional Pokémon leagues had just been established, but they had not yet formed a grand alliance. The villains who had been causing trouble in the various regions were driven out by their local leagues and had fled to the seas. For a while, the oceans of this world were in chaos. It was, in effect, a great pirate era. At that time, Tom was still a rich young master. If not for that status, he never would have met Sola, who had also been from a noble family. Tom had his own yacht, and his dream was to sail it around the world, to be the freest man alive. But at that time, the Hone region was in turmoil, and there were many refugees. Batch after batch of them, it was impossible to tell who was a good person and who was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Tom, being kind-hearted and heroic, wanted to be a great hero. He repeatedly sailed his yacht back and forth between Hone and Johto, each time taking thousands of refugees and their Pokémon who were trying to escape to the peaceful Johto region. However, what ordinary people could think of, the villains could too. Many pirates roamed the seas off the Johto coast, robbing these refugees to survive. At that time, the Indigo League had just resolved its own internal conflicts and had to manage both the Kanto and Johto mainlands, not to mention the Caei Islands, which had been annexed into the Kanto map hundreds of years prior by the Dragonite Kingdom. They couldn't even get help from Sinnoh, let alone deal with the pirates in the southern seas. Even though Tom knew the sea routes well, there's always a chance of capsizing. That one time, he had run right into a pirate crew. A ship full of refugees and only a few dozen Pokémon. How could they possibly fight against pirates who killed without a second thought? To protect everyone, Tom tried to get the refugees and Pokémon to abandon the yacht and hide on a nearby reef to wait for rescue. Who would have thought that the pirates, hearing him say this, would just kick him off the boat? They wanted to use the humans and Pokémon as slaves, to live like kings. The Corphish, who at the time was just a reckless youth, saw Tom get kicked overboard and snapped. It didn't care if it could win or not. It charged onto the pirate ship, pincers raised, and was beaten half to death and thrown overboard. That one battle had caused it to suffer internal injuries that even modern medicine couldn't heal, and it had completely lost the ability to evolve. The yacht sailed away, leaving only Tom and the half-dead Corphish on the giant reef. Tom didn't even know how he had managed to keep the Corphish alive with the half a piece of bread he had in his pocket. Perhaps the Corphish just had a strong will to live. After surviving this ordeal together, Tom and Corphish chatted while they waited for rescue. Tom couldn't understand what the Corphish was saying, but that didn't matter. They talked about everything under the sun. It was then that Corphish learned how much the ship meant to Tom. It was his dream, a dream that had been stolen. From that moment on, the Corphish made a silent promise in its heart. It would protect Tom and his ship with its life. It would not let its savior and best friend lose anything ever again. Later, the two were rescued and went to Johto. They worked as fishermen for 10 years, saving up just enough money to buy a speedboat and return to Evergrande City. That boat was their baby. Only they knew how important it was. But today, 10 years later, that treasure had been destroyed again. That was why the Corphish had lost its mind. Hey! I broke a man's promise. Remembering the past, the Corphish wanted to cry again. It felt so useless. You idiot! A real man doesn't get stuck in a rut. As long as you gave it your all, even if you didn't keep your promise, a brave sailor of the sea stands tall and proud, loud and proud. Smack! Tom angrily slapped the Corphish's shoulder. He stood up, put his hands on his hips, and faced the sea. Besides, from that moment on, the most important thing to me was you moron. Hey! Of course I don't blame you. It's just a boat. With our fishing skills, we can easily buy another one. What, are you doubting your own skills? Hey! Then let's challenge this sea again. Hey! Tom and the Corphish roared at the ocean, and then they began to sing some unknown sea shanty. These two, they don't seem like they've been shipwrecked at all. Will shook his head, falling silent as the sea breeze blew past. A promise made by a man must be kept. I broke a man's promise, he thought, lowering his head, feeling dejected. Smack! Smack! A sudden slap from a hand and a pincer hit him on the back, making it sting. What the? Are you too crazy? Don't just mope around, grovel. It's just a little shipwreck, it's no big deal. A real man must face all hardships, loud and proud. Hey! Tom and the Corphish pulled him up, forcing him to join their ridiculous dance on the isolated reef. Just then, a head poked out of the nearby sea. A ferocious-looking Gyarados. But its expression was strange, as if it was looking at something bizarre. Stop it! You're acting like lunatics, dancing here. Will's face turned red. He shoved the two goofballs aside, then picked up the egg, sat on the edge of the reef, and tried to look aloof and melancholy. The Gyarados hovered in place, considering, then finally returned to the depths. It had no intention of eating these things. It just thought they were being too loud and wanted to teach them a lesson. But now it thought that just getting near them would make it drool. It was safer to just move. Watching the Gyarados disappear, Will sighed in relief. The noisy sounds of his companions and the splashing of the waves entered his ears, and his memory drifted back 1,000 years. "A promise," he murmured, then fell silent again. Time passed. Night began to fall. The Pokémon egg in Will's arms began to flash faster and faster. "Is it going to be born?" "Hey hey!" Tom and the Corphish brought their heads over, their faces full of novelty, all the sadness from the day gone. "What do we do? The baby is about to be born, but the world outside is so cold and quiet. Corphish, as a man, can we allow this to happen?" "Hey hey! Then let us perform a dance that will shake the 7 seas, to welcome this new baby. Hey hey hey! Could you two dance a little further away? I'm afraid you'll scare it from coming out." Chapter 118, Another Grass-type Starter? When the light from the egg became a continuous glow, the surface of the sea around the reef was illuminated. Some aquatic Pokémon, attracted by the light, poked their heads out of the water. But Will had no time to pay attention to them. His gaze was fixed on the egg in his arms. In the white light, the oval-shaped egg began to change form. Even though it wasn't his first time seeing a Pokémon hatch, the process still filled him with a sense of wonder. Meow! The sound came before the shape was clear. "A skitty." Will tilted his head. The voice was soft and sounded a bit like Granny Sola's. There were a lot of cat Pokémon in the world, but only a few came to mind immediately. Among them, Meowth, Litten, and Sprigatito were the most famous in the anime, games, and fan communities, respectively. But because he had just recently interacted with one, his first thought was of Skitty. When the white light faded, Will knew he had guessed wrong. This was a little green cat. And it was a grass-type starter. A Sprigatito. Meow. The moment the Sprigatito was born, its gaze locked onto Will. Its big pink eyes stared at the grovel, and then it looked down at itself. Same color. Check. Similar aura. Check. It's mom. Meow. Having confirmed this, the Sprigatito leaped directly into Will's arms. "Hello, Sprigatito." Will picked up the Sprigatito and rubbed his cheek against it in a friendly gesture. Although his heart was in a complicated state, the first priority was to greet the little one. This Pokémon, Sprigatito, was the dark horse of the popularity world. In the rankings of grass-type Pokémon, its popularity had even surpassed Serperior, second only to Rowlet, and that was its ranking before the main anime had even featured it. There was another, more critical reason. Among the 3 final stage starters of the 9th generation, the only good-looking one was Meowscarada. The other 2 were, not so easy on the eyes. This was especially true for players who chose Fuecoco. The moment they saw Skeledirge, they were in a mad dash to find an Everstone. But that was just aesthetics. In terms of strength, the crocodile had the last laugh. As for Sprigatito's final evolution, Meowscarada, it was quite strong at first, but after its Protean ability was nerfed, its power dropped, though it was still far from weak. Setting the games aside and thinking in practical terms, its typing had 6 weaknesses and 6 resistances. 1 immunity, psychic, and 1 4x weakness, bug, weren't game changers. Overall, it was decent. Its stats were focused on physical attack and speed, exactly the distribution his own Sceptile dreamed of. But Sprigatito's most outstanding point was undoubtedly its absurdly wide move pool. Of the 18 types, it could learn moves from 15 of them. The only ones it couldn't learn were Fire, Dragon, and the Noble Steel. Meow, the Sprigatito, new to this world, was curious about everything. But it was unwilling to leave Will's arms, so it just sat there, looking around. 0.15 meters, less than 2 kilograms? Looks like it's a girl, Will said, looking down at the wiggling little furball. Its voice was too high-pitched for him to tell, so he could only judge its gender by its size. Most newborn Sprigatito were 0.2 meters or even a bit taller. This was because 87.5% of them were male, and the males were generally larger with a deeper body color. The one he had hatched was so small, it was, without a doubt, one of the rare females. Meow. The Sprigatito looked up at Will, its little paw pointing at Tom and Corphish, who were dancing on the other side of the reef. "Don't worry about them. Are you hungry? Let's see what there is to eat," Will said, scratching the Sprigatito under the chin. He then stood up and walked towards the 2 food boxes the blue-haired man had left. He hadn't eaten since being dropped here, mostly because he wasn't hungry. He felt that a grass-type Pokémon could probably go for several days without eating and be just fine. Meow. Pokémon mush? That guy was actually pretty thorough, Will said, picking up a can. He recognized this because he had been fed it at Sola's. It was a common food for baby Pokémon in this era, and it came in many flavors. Of course, Sola had fed him a specially processed goat milk mush, which was definitely superior in taste, texture, and nutritional value. But they couldn't be picky right now. Will's fingers were sharp, and he easily opened the can. The mush inside was green, apparently made from some kind of plant as the main ingredient. Want to try? Will sniffed it. It didn't smell bad and was probably well suited for a grass type. Perhaps the blue-haired man had seen the egg was green, guessed it was a grass type, and left this flavor. The SPR Gatito licked it, its eyes lit up, and it buried its head in the can and began to chow down. In less than 3 minutes, the palm-sized kitten had inhaled a can almost as big as itself. Impressive, Will couldn't help but marvel. Just then, Tom and the Corphish finally noticed the baby had been born and ran over to look at the little cat in Will's arms. Hey? What kind of Pokémon is that? I've never seen it before. Tom's eyes widened, shining with light. This was a Pokémon he had truly never encountered. He had been sailing these seas for so long, and while he mostly traveled between Hone and Johto, he had also been to the more distant Kanto, Sinnoh, and Alola. But he had never seen or heard of a Pokémon like SPR Gatito. Hey! The Corphish didn't care about that, it just waved its pincers to greet the SPR Gatito. It even wanted to pet it, but Will blocked it with his hand. With the Corphish's lack of gentleness, one pat might have killed it. Meow. The SPR Gatito looked at the 2 large creatures that had suddenly approached, its big eyes trembling. Strange guys. It quickly shrank back into Will's arms. Will wiped the mush off the little one's fur. He had analyzed some non-critical information from Tom's reaction. SPR Gatito is mainly distributed in the Paldea region. As for other regions, he didn't know, but as of when he had crossed over, there had been no news of wild SPR Gatito populations being discovered elsewhere. Kanto, Johto, the Caei Islands, Hone, and Sinnoh were in the Pokémon world's northern hemisphere. Alola was in the middle. Unova, Paldea, Galar, and Kalos were in the southern hemisphere. Tom's shipping routes were mainly in the western part of the northern hemisphere, so it was perfectly normal for him not to have seen a Pokémon from the other half of the world. It was just like in Unova, where Iris and Celine, who were from the southern part of the world, had never even heard of Pikachu, a Pokémon that in Kanto was as common as a stray dog. But Pikachu and SPR Gatito were different. Pikachu was world famous in his world, but in the Pokémon world, it was just an ordinary, unremarkable Pokémon. For the people of Unova, it was perfectly normal not to have seen or heard of it. But SPR Gatito was a starter chosen by the Paldea League, its data should have been registered. The League needed to account for the wishes of new trainers. Some might not like their local starters and could go to another region's lab to get a Pokémon. But before that, they needed to learn about the other region's starters. So, in theory, you should be able to easily find basic information about other regions' starters in any league. For Tom, who traveled everywhere and knew all kinds of people, to have never heard of it. Has the Paldea League not established its starters yet? No, wait. I don't think the Home League has either, Will thought, as a sudden realization hit him. He was so familiar with the regional starters because of his past memories. So, he had just assumed that since the leagues existed, the starters must also exist. But this was only League Year 20. This was an era before the Pokémon League Conference had even been held. Many regions had only just stabilized from turmoil. Where would they find the time to research and establish suitable Pokémon for new trainers? The specialized starter breeding facilities probably didn't even exist yet. Perhaps Kanto and Johto had established theirs, since their leagues were founded 80 years ago, but the Home League, which was only 30 or 40 years old, was much younger. If even Kanto and Johto hadn't finalized their starters, then the other regions certainly hadn't. Does that mean that in Johto, both me and SPR Gatito will be extremely conspicuous? Will raised an eyebrow. This was not good news. He and SPR Gatito were wild Pokémon. If some uncultured person suddenly popped out of the tall grass and threw a dozen Pokeballs at them, it would be incredibly annoying. I'd better find a Pokeball and catch myself first, Will thought, his mind made up. When he got to Johto, he would find a way to get a Pokeball and capture himself. That way, he wouldn't have to be afraid of someone throwing even a Master Ball at him. As for Spr Gatito, Will looked down at the little green cat clinging to him, unsure of what to do. Should he hand it over to the Pokémon League? He was a little reluctant. He wanted to keep it, to raise it by his side, to become a Pokémon trainer, as a Pokémon. Chapter 119, Sprigatito's Decision. On the second day after landing on the reef, Will and the others were not met by a rescue team, but by a medium-sized destroyer. It was a warship jointly built by the Orange Academy and the Paldea League. It was the most advanced piece of technology Paldea had on the seas, capable of delivering a dimension-crushing blow to the pirates who were still using motorized sailboats. For a destroyer from Paldea to appear in the waters between Johto and Hoenn was clearly unusual. After a careful inquiry, they learned the truth. They had come chasing the very same gang of egg thieves. The thieves hadn't just stolen from the Pokémon League, they had stolen eggs that the Paldea League was cultivating for the Orange Academy. This was a problem. In the Paldea region, the Orange Academy was even more powerful than the current Paldea League. The Academy was founded almost 800 years ago during the era of primal beasts, a time when the Paldea region was ruled by an emperor. The Paldea League, however, was only established a few decades ago, and its founding had required a great deal of help from the Academy's teachers and students. So, the thieves had stolen from the one group in Paldea they should have never touched. As one of the oldest and most prestigious schools in the world, the Orange Academy welcomed people from all regions. The school had no age restrictions for enrollment, and its student body was vast, from small children to adults. Because of this, there was no shortage of powerful heirs and nobles among them. With their help, the Paldea League had developed destroyers long ago to crack down on surrounding pirates. And now, the Academy was borrowing a destroyer to hunt down the thieves. The League not only wouldn't refuse but had proactively contacted the other four leagues Unova, Hoenn, Johto, and Sinnoh to inform them of the situation and request their support if they saw the ship. On the destroyer's deck, Captain Tom and his corpsman were indignantly giving the captain all the information they had on the thieves. When the captain learned the thieves had swapped to a pirate ship, he immediately contacted the Sinnoh League, hoping they could arrange for police to wait at Sinnoh's coastal cities. On the other side of the deck, Will was holding Spr Gatito and sitting quietly in a corner, surrounded by a dozen people who were observing and taking notes. This is a bit much, Will thought, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He had guessed he would attract a lot of attention outside of Hoenn, but he had never expected this level of scrutiny. Meow. Sprigatito's fur was standing on end. It hissed at the humans, protecting the grovel in its arms. It would not allow these bad guys to hurt its mom. Ah, the baby Spr Gatito is protecting the grovel. This might be a once-in-a-lifetime sight. I have to get a picture. Our little baby Spr Gatito is so cute. This grovel is also incredible. It's completely different from the data I've read. Exactly. Its leaves are so vibrant, it's almost otherworldly. And its height and weight are practically era of primal beast standards. It was raised incredibly well. I think we need to pay a visit to the person who raised it on our way back. Maybe we can get some breeding tips. We should try to recruit them as a teacher at our academy. The dozen or so people chattered endlessly. Will and Spr Gatito huddled together, unable to go anywhere. Elsewhere on the ship, another group was waiting eagerly for their chance to get close. Spr Gatito was one thing, since it was a local Pokémon from Paldea. But a grovel this rare, especially such a unique one, if they hadn't learned that it was already heading to Johto, they really would have tried to capture it and bring it back to the school. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, please calm down. Let's not damage the decorum of our Orange Academy. A man in a suit, slightly portly and with a receding hairline, walked over. He was the director of the Orange Academy and the man who had insisted on hunting down the thieves. Although he looked kind and easygoing, his words were strict, and his every move seemed to be governed by precise requirements. Will, who had seen Iris's etiquette lessons, felt this man's grasp of etiquette was even more exaggerated than her royal tutor's. Hearing his words, the dozen or so teachers who had been crowding them quieted down and retreated to a respectful distance, continuing to observe. Hello, Grovel, and Spr Gatito. My name is Valen, the director of Orange Academy, Valen said, adjusting his bow tie and giving a slight bow. Will held Spr Gatito and said nothing, just staring at him. His sharp gaze emitted a fierce aura, which made even the director raise an eyebrow. It wasn't that Will was intentionally targeting him, he was just wary. The thought that this man might try to take Spr Igatito away from him had put him in an involuntarily bad mood, even though he knew Spr Igatito originally belonged to the academy. I've seen this kind of aura on other Pokémon before, but they were all, without exception, powerful warriors who had claimed their own territory. It seems you've had some rather unique experiences, Valen said, stroking the small mustache under his nose. He laboriously squatted down and sat cross-legged on the deck, lowering himself to their level. As Valen was thinking, Will also looked at the man with curiosity. From that one sentence, he could tell that this man was no ordinary person. To be able to judge his unusual past based on something as ethereal as an aura, it seemed the director of the Orange Academy was indeed no simple character. I understand. Are you worried that I'm going to take the Spr Igatito back? I do have that intention, but the Orange Academy's motto explicitly states, as trainers, we must respect a Pokémon's own choice. Valen had already guessed why Will was acting so unwelcoming. Spr Igatito, are you willing to leave me? Will asked, hearing Valen's words and turning to the kitten in his arms. This was perfect. He had been in a state of hesitation himself, wanting to keep and raise it, but not knowing if he should. Since that was the case, he would let the Spr Igatito decide for itself. If it was willing to stay with him, he would raise it as his own apprentice. They were both grass-type Pokémon, after all. He was certain he could understand its condition better than any human trainer. He could test many things himself first before deciding whether to have Spr Igatito follow suit. He was confident he could raise it well. If it didn't want to stay, he could immediately cut off the thought and stop worrying, focusing solely on his trip to the Dragonite clan. Meow meow. Spr Igatito shook its head without even thinking, hugging Will's arm tightly to express its decision. Seeing this, Will grinned. It seems Spr Igatito has already made its choice. In that case, I will not disturb you, Valen said. Although he couldn't understand their dialogue, he understood what had happened. He smiled and nodded, then got up and left without any fuss. The Paldean destroyer was much faster than Tom's speedboat. It was probably because Tom's model was quite old, having been purchased nearly 20 years ago. Only half a day had passed since they had boarded the ship, but they had already traveled a distance that would have taken the speedboat a day and a half. We should be arriving soon, Will muttered, picking up Spr Igatito and walking to the bow of the ship. Meow. Land. There are many beautiful places on land. I'll take you to see them. I think you'll really like the forests and grasslands. Will didn't know how to explain it to the kitten. He couldn't just transfer the images he had seen into its mind, but he could take it to see those places himself in the days to come. Hudunk. A loud horn sounded. This meant the destroyer had reached the coastal waters of the Johto region. Hey Grovel! And Spr Igatito! Come on over, it's time to get off the ship. Hey hey! Tom and Corfish's voices called out from behind him. They had learned the name of the new Pokémon species from the Paldeans. Let's go! Meow! Will carried Spr Igatito and ran over. The destroyer wouldn't be stopping at the coast, they still had to chase the thieves all the way to Sinnoh. However, they were giving them a small rowboat so they could reach the Johto region. This time, Tom and Corfish wouldn't be able to accompany them on the boat. The rowboat was too small, if it took on both Tom and Corfish, it would probably sink. Wait a moment. Director Valen came over, holding a small green box, and handed it to Will. What's this? Meow. Spr Igatito sniffed the green box, seeming to smell something it liked. It started pawing at the box with its small, unformed claws. No, don't do that. You'll ruin your nails before they've even grown in, Will said, stopping her. Inside are some things that Spr Igatito might need. Consider it a blessing. I hope you have a smooth journey, Valen explained briefly, then patted his chest. If you ever encounter any difficulties, you are always welcome at the Orange Academy. After all, Spr Igatito is one of ours. And I think that whether it's the teachers or the students, everyone would be very happy to welcome you as well, Grovel. Thank you. Spr Igatito, say thank you, Will said, bowing with the kitten in his arms. Meow, Spr Igatito bowed its head, mimicking Will. But its little eyes were still glued to the green box. Chapter 120, the mischievous SPR Igatito. On the destroyer. Before they boarded the small rowboat, Will, holding SPR Igatito, sat down with Captain Tom to look at a map of the Hone region. You really can't bear to let go of that SPR Igatito, can you, Grovel? Tom said, smiling at the big creature and the little kitten. No matter how you looked at it, the pair was fascinating. When he got back to Evergrande, he absolutely had to tell Sola about this. She's the one who refuses to leave me, Will replied, not about to admit his own attachment. Meow SPR Igatito, however, cheerfully admitted she didn't want to leave him. All right, back to business. Look, we are currently located here, Tom said, spreading out the map. It was a gift from Director Valen, but for Tom, who had been working in the Johto region for 10 years, he didn't need it. He planned to leave it for Will. The closest city to us is the southernmost town in Johto, Azalea Town, Tom said, pointing with his finger. He then pointed to a city in the northeast. This is our original destination, Cherry Grove City. Will looked it over and felt relieved. The distance between Azalea and Cherry Grove wasn't that far, at least much closer than the original journey from the Dragonite capital to Cherry Grove. The reason they weren't taking him directly to Cherry Grove was that the small rowboat simply couldn't handle such a long journey. As an old sea captain, Tom knew the dangers of this ocean. If the wind and waves picked up, or if they ran into some water-type Pokémon fighting, the small boat would capsize immediately. For safety's sake, heading to the nearby Azalea Town was the most stable option. Azalea Town is a small town surrounded by a forest, as if it's been left behind by time. I've heard it hasn't changed at all in hundreds of years, and it's very hard to find. If you want to get to Cherry Grove from there, you'll probably have to walk. Tom stroked his chin, analyzing the situation for Will. In his 10 years in Johto, he had never once been to Azalea Town. Not because he didn't want to, but mainly because it was hard to find, and the mountain roads were treacherous and unsuitable for carriages. He had only heard about the place from other old fishermen. That's fine. A small problem, Will said, unconcerned. Walking was fine. It would be a good chance to train SPR Igatito in the wild and let her see the world. When you arrive in Cherry Grove, go to the seaside and look for a young man named Leaf. Give him this letter. You won't have to worry about the rest, he'll get you to Blackthorn City, Tom said, pulling a letter from his coat and handing it to Will. Leaf was a noble kid that he and Corpish had accidentally rescued years ago. He should be in his 20s by now. At the time, Leaf had said he owed them a favor and that they could find him if they ever had any difficulties. He had even offered to have his father buy Tom a new yacht, but Tom had refused. Tom never kept track of the good deeds he did and had never taken the kid's words to heart. But Leaf had started visiting him and Corpish frequently after that. Because he loved fishing, he would often skip his classes and fish from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. Corpish's fishing skills had deeply impressed him. Leaf had even started calling Corpish his master. If Tom hadn't been so worried about Grovel and SPR Igatito, he probably wouldn't even have remembered he knew such a person in Cherry Grove. But he had no intention of telling Will any of this. Hey. Corpish chimed in. He told Will not to be polite with Leaf, that was his little bro. If his little bro gave him any trouble, he'd personally go over and give him a pinch. Thank you, Captain Tom. Will looked at the handwriting on the envelope, it must have been written just a short while ago. Tom must have borrowed a pen and paper from the people at the academy. He put the letter in the backpack Granny Sola had given him and memorized Tom's words. All right, it's time to get off the boat, Tom said, putting the map in Will's backpack. He stood up. At the edge of their vision, they could already see the land of the Johto region. Meow. SPR Igatito, seeing such a large reef for the first time, excitedly kicked her little legs in Will's arms. Behave, Will said, scratching her little ears. But the little one couldn't calm down and kept squirming. Well then, we'll be saying goodbye, Will said, standing up and holding SPR Igatito and the green box. With the help of the crew, they were lowered onto the small rowboat floating on the sea below. Stay inside the boat, don't run around, and don't stick your head out. There are scary, big sharks in the sea that will eat you in one bite. Will said, putting SPR Igatito on the floor and giving her a mission, guard the green box, or you'll lose it. Meow. Hearing this, SPR Igatito immediately hugged the box. Even if the box sank into the sea today, she would sink with it. Will looked at her, shook his head helplessly, and then grabbed the oars and began to row. The small boat slowly moved forward, approaching the landmass not far away. Grovel, be careful. Remember what I told you. Tom shouted from the destroyer as Will pulled away. Hey hey. Corphish also waved its pincers vigorously to say goodbye. Meow meow. Spri Gatito raised a small paw in response. Will just smiled, his eyes crinkling as he waved. A real man must march forward, loud and proud. Corphish, let us perform the dance of sailors, to send off our friends. Hey hey. Deliver Binks's brew to the man who waits for you. Hey hey hey. Tom and Corphish began to do a strange dance, singing a cheerful song at the top of their lungs in Will's direction. Ha ha ha. Unlike in the past, this time Will didn't feel embarrassed or confused. Instead, he couldn't help but laugh. He knew very well, this was just the unique style of his two friends. I'm really glad I met you too. The small boat and the giant destroyer grew further and further apart, finally disappearing from each other's sight. On the sea. We should be there in another 5 minutes, Will said, looking at the nearby shore of the Johto region, feeling a little nostalgic. Although he had never been anywhere in his past life except for the Dragonite capital and Jubilance town, he still felt some affection for this land. Meow. Just then, Spri Gatito made a curious sound. Will turned his head and his face went white. The kitten had, at some point, stuck its head out of the boat, and at that exact moment, a Carvanha leaped out of the water, its massive jaws aiming for her little head. Get the hell out of here! With a speed invisible to the naked eye, Will threw the oar in his hand. Thwack! The oar slammed into the Carvanha, knocking it back into the sea. Will didn't even have time to think. He grabbed Spri Gatito, pulling her back and pinning her under the green box so she couldn't move. Then, he jumped directly into the sea, put his hands on the back of the boat, and started pushing. Of course, this wasn't ordinary swimming. It was extreme speed swimming. Me. In that moment, Will kicked both his legs and his tail, turning himself into a gravel-browned propeller, and the small boat shot forward. Splash! Splash! A moment later, 7 or 8 Carvanha surfaced behind them, in hot pursuit. I knew it. Will didn't even need to turn around. Just by hearing the sound of their snapping jaws, he knew what was happening. Thanks to Corphish, he knew that if you saw one Carvanha, you had most likely stumbled into their nest. And if your luck was really bad, their evolved form, Sharpedo, might be in there too. In any case, the moment you see them, you don't hesitate. You just flee at full speed. You never know your limits until you are forced to push them. The journey to the coast, which should have taken 5 minutes to row, took Will only 1 minute. That's extreme speed for you. Ha! 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 Will, carrying Spri Gatito and the green box, collapsed on the shore as soon as he landed. He lay on the ground, panting frantically, wanting nothing more than to pass out. But he was afraid Spri Gatito would get into another crisis while he was unconscious, so he forced himself to stay awake. Meow meow meow. Spri Gatito ran circles around Will, wagging her little tail and praising him for how amazing he was. Even if you praise me, you're still getting a spanking today. Will rested for a moment, then sat up, pulled Spri Gatito over, and gave her a couple of light smacks on the rear. That's for not listening. In reality, he was just making the motions, his hand barely even touched her. Meow. Meow. Spri Gatito let out a piercing cry, her big eyes instantly welling up with tears. On the other hand, if it weren't for you, I probably wouldn't have noticed we'd entered their territory. So maybe I should thank you. Meow. Alright, Spri Gatito is the best, Will said, putting her aside. He shouldered his backpack, picked up the box, and prepared to set off again. 1 second, Spri Gatito had been a teary, pitiful mess. The next, she was bright and sunny again. She was a born drama queen. Meow. She trotted up and started pawing at his leg. Walk on your own. Don't you want to feel the difference between the dirt and the reef? Meow. Spri Gatito did not want to feel the dirt. She just wanted to stick to Will. Fine. But you behave, and don't move, Will said, putting her inside his backpack, leaving only her head sticking out. And so, the large and the small Pokémon set off into the forest, beginning their search for the hidden Azalea town.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.